In the past, there were 4 masters who fought to become the best in the world. At that time, the cult of demonic blood aimed to dominate the Murim and prepared a trap to achieve their goal. With a blade at his neck, the boy calls out to his father. The boy's father drops his sword to the ground, pleading at least to spare his son's life. The boy begs his father not to do it, while the man threatening him smiles. And so, the 4 masters were imprisoned in an underground prison. Those who captured them ordered that the boy should study the martial arts of the 4 masters. As the boy asks if he can do it his way and if 10 years would be enough, an enraged blonde man clenches his fists while the master agrees, saying he'll do his best since he's the best in the academy, and the boy bows to him, saying he won't disappoint. The boy lifts his head with a smile and says that from now on they will be his instructors and must teach him their martial arts. But the masters insult him and say it'll take his life. However, the boy simply asks if they don't want to leave that place. The blonde master shouts angrily, accusing him of trying to trick them easily. But the boy asks if they really think the demonic strategist would let someone live after mastering all martial arts, surprising the 4 as it should be impossible. And there was a reason the boy had chosen this task, since his body did not use internal breathing, and there was no way their connections could be spared. So the boy offered the masters a deal. After thinking it over for a while, they all agreed. 10 years passed, and the boy spits blood, saying that from the beginning, the strategist had planned to take all their lives. That strategist, with his hand covered in blood, says they should be honest, because the boy never trusted him, and that's why, right behind him, were corpses that should have been dead long ago. The strategist was aware of their physical condition, and even if they recovered their martial arts, it would only be temporary, so they should stop bluffing and die, because he would use the abilities left behind by the masters. The boy agrees with him and says that sometimes you have to go all in to feel less unfair. He reflects that this meant the strategist wasn't that great after all, and it was a fact that people were ready for a K deviation, so he says it was nothing. But he thought the strategist wasn't understanding something, because he didn't learn the 4 martial arts. They had learned 5 arts, transforming into a red-haired version of himself. The strategist recognizes the strange sensation he felt, asking how he knew the martial art that defies the heavens. It was something only the creators had used, but the boy charges in without a speech, since it was incomplete. Yet unless the blood demon comes out of seclusion, he is invincible. He advances with the 4 masters toward the cult soldiers. Manhwa, the king of the green forest, lands a punch on the soldier, saying he won't let a single soul escape. The cult members shout not to let them get away. The radiant horse, Manhua, prepares his blade, saying that today the demonic cult would vanish from Murim, slicing all the cult members into pieces. One of them appears behind him and prepares a stealth attack, but the goddess of the ice moon, Yeon, stops him using her ice martial art and says she will return all the shame she endured. The cult soldier then falls frozen behind Manhua. The swordsman Mo Yonghan comments that it seemed too early for this, then performs a horizontal slash with his sword. Hoke attacks with his fists and tells anyone who doesn't want to die to move. While the strategist wonders where Shounen is, he gets punched in the face by the boy, who responds by asking if he was looking for him, and wants to know if his greeting was too rough. But a glowing blue aura shines behind the instructor. Someone is coming to protect the demonic strategist. That person arrives with a sword. Shounen comments that in the end, the bloodthirsty demon himself had come. Then that day, a mountain shakes, followed by an explosion as they lost their lives. In a city at morning, the boy lies on a wooden bed. A little boy approaches, calling his master, asking if he was staring into space again, and the master asks, "What is it?" The boy explains that all the kids were looking for him at the academy, but Bake says for everyone to study alone with the ball to play. His student yells that if he keeps doing that, he's going to complain to the grandmaster, and his master calls him an idiot. The boy keeps tugging on his master to go teach, so after much insistence, Bake gets up and agrees to go, with the boy urging him to hurry, because every moment was precious to them. Almost a month ago, Shounen woke up in the body of a martial arts master from a village. Baek Shounen was the name of this body, born with a rare condition where he faced many life-threatening situations since birth, and even his mother lost her life after giving birth. His father tried to save the boy by seeking medicines, but it was no use, and eventually, because of his weak son, he built an academy in a village where the water and air were good. But his son trained in martial arts until he was no longer able to learn properly. They said he tried every way to cure the illness, and while doing so, he learned to use demonic arts through practice and then collapsed. However, the real Shounen lost his life. He was aware of his own death, leaving behind a letter. After that, he woke up in this body and a month had already passed. Suddenly, someone enters the academy. Bake reflects that they used to say the demonic blood cult had been purged decades ago. The boy's father asks if he had something to say. Shounen replies that there was no doubt he needed to go through rigorous training to learn martial arts, because in that way, time, money, and determination wouldn't be wasted. otherwise they should bring silks and dedicate them. But he is interrupted by his father. He asks if he had forced children under 10 to train hard for an hour, calling it inhumane, while Baek thinks he could see it coming but couldn't escape. He mutters that everything he did was just what he learned in the cult, and the kids were weak. The academy director, Baek Mi-hyun, was furious with him, but Suryong replies that to learn martial arts, one needed endurance and perseverance. Mi-hyun asks if the boy knew what kind of place that was as a child approaches calling for his master. The grandmaster of the academy turns and asks Jang what was wrong. Crying, the boy points behind him, begging them to save his brother. Mi-hyun is surprised by the request, along with Suryong, as Jang's father pleads with Master Baek to save his son. The master agrees to the request and asks to see the boy. Asking what had happened to him, Suryong notices that it was an injury caused by martial arts. Mi-hyun says some bones were broken, but without serious injuries, he would do first aid, and the parents should take him to a doctor tomorrow. The boy's skin color returns to normal. Then his father thanks him, saying he was grateful to the master, and Jang asks if his brother is really okay. Mi-hyun places a hand on the child's head and tells him not to worry, because his brother will be fine if he rests. However, he wanted to know who did this. Suryong reflects that he was trying to finish up, but the pressure was overwhelming, and he had thought about this before, but it wasn't normal. The boy's father says he got hurt fighting with friends, but Mi-hyun argues that he hates to be the one to say it, but Janjul has the best skills among the other children. However, what hurt him wasn't something he had taught. The boy's father looks away, uneasy, but Jang defends him, saying it was the fault of the people from Jin Academy, because they attacked his brother first, ignoring Baek Academy, and claiming it only taught weak martial arts. Suryong asks about Jin Academy, and Mi-hyun questions if it wasn't the academy from Borderin Village, because he had heard it was a branch of the Namgon clan. Suryong wonders why the Namgon clan would establish a branch in such a rural area. It was suspicious. Mi-hyun asks if it had been multiple disciples who attacked, but Jang says it was just one. Suryong wants to know about that person, and his student explains that Yangsum knew all his techniques. The boy reflects that he was just a child who used to live there, but he notices something strange on Jangle's chest. Wondering if he had used a deadly technique, he approaches the boy's chest, thinking that it was extremely cruel. Jang yells that they needed to go to Jin Academy and punish Yangsum. Mi-hyun places a hand on the boy's head and says he would punish him, because he would have to speak with the academy's director, and the boy's father says that these things happen when children fight, but he just wanted to know if his son was okay. The Grandmaster says he would discuss the matter strictly with them, while Suryong thinks he felt that it wouldn't end with just a warning. Wondering if there really was a branch of the Namgon clan, Mi-hyun approaches a man who asks what all the commotion was about so early in the morning, and the director responds that it was from Baek Academy. Suryong reflects that he looked like a mountain bandit, but was a subordinate of the Namgon clan, which was strange because he seemed like just a second-rate fighter. Mi-hyun explains that last week, their academy's discipline was injured after a fight with a student from that academy. But the director scratches his ear and asks what that had to do with him, saying Mi-hyun was making too much noise over a children's fight. The director of Baek Academy replies that the child's body was too badly injured to call it a simple fight. But the man starts laughing, saying boys grow up and get hurt when they fight, but Baek Academy was treating them like little girls. Mi-hyun says he never taught his student to harm others. However, he wasn't so sure about him, calling him by name, Yangsum, and asking if he knew he almost took his friend's life that night. The director of Jin Academy glares angrily at Mi-hyun, while Yangsum feels the pressure in the situation, saying that it had been a fair fight. Mi-hyun questions if he really believed that. The head of Jin Academy waves his hand and asks what Baek was doing with his student, saying he should be teaching his students to be stronger, not coming to other academies to disrupt order over a weak child. Suryong gets furious and approaches the man, telling him to pay attention. Jin retorts that the one doing the teaching clearly wasn't skilled in martial arts, so it was no surprise Baek Academy's student had lost. Suryong sighs, irritated by the provocation, but looks back in surprise, because there were children cheering for a fight that was about to break out in the academy. Suryong complains that it was a trap, since the man had planned it and sent Yangsum to attack Jangle. Because if his father denied it, rumors would spread that he was a coward, and all the students of Baek Academy would leave. They were excited about Director Jin, and even if it was him challenging, it would just seem like revenge for the kids, and nothing good would come from it, no matter the decision. Jin smiles widely, but someone arrives, coughing in the area. The members of the academy bow to the elder, who says everyone should know that this was Master Namgon, a teacher at Xianmu Academy and distant relative of the Sword King Changsun, Namgon Jahak, meaning he carried the blood of the great Namgon clan. Jin says it was nothing special, and that he should work hard not to bring shame to his clan. Suryong, however, bets he wasn't from the Namgon clan, and his father looks straight ahead. The young man reflects that, as expected, The villagers believed the lies, and that was the problem, so he should do something. He steps forward between the two and says it was amazing. Jin is surprised by the boy's reaction, but Suryong asks if the martial arts taught at Jin Academy were the same as those from the Namgon clan. Jin explains that yes, but not the exact same techniques. It followed the same lineage, and Suryong flatters him for that and for enhancing Yangsun's skill so quickly. The academy director laughs with the boy and says he even teach him if he wanted. The villagers shout that it was expected from the Namgon clan, and such an academy was amazing to have in their village. Mihyun just calls out to his son apprehensively. Suryong quickly winks at him, but then says he really didn't think the Namgon clan's techniques would have such a thirst for blood, because he thought he was a martial artist for an evil sect, given how thick his killing intent was. The two men are startled by the boy's comparison. Even Muhyun wonders what he meant, and the villagers repeat what was said about the evil sect. Suryong reflects that this was good because the atmosphere had shifted a bit, and continues, saying that the worse the skill, the easier it was to learn. Jin angrily complains about the way he was talking, but Suryong asks what was with that expression of his. The academy director was irritated at being compared to the evil sect, but Muhyun calls Suryong in his mind. He's surprised to hear his father's voice mentally, who asks if he was sure they were teaching martial arts from the evil sect. Suryong replies that he would take care of it and that his father should stay still, saying that since they weren't sure, they should make sure, and asks how it would sound to everyone. Since the great Namgon opened this academy, they should contact the clan and ask them to send congratulations. And it would also be good if he could prove that Yangsun didn't learn arts from the evil sect. Jin tells him to shut his mouth unless he wanted to lose his life, but then falls silent suddenly, hearing that the whole crowd was starting to wonder if he was a fraud. Jin becomes nervous amidst the malicious whispers. Then the elder asks if Suryong could take responsibility for what he had just said. The boy thinks that, as expected, the director was the real deal, and asks what he meant by responsibility. But the elder argues that they weren't teaching martial arts from an evil sect while using the Namgon clan's name, and if he made such claims without evidence, he could be punished. He questions whether the boy knew how dangerous what he was doing was, since the Namgon clan would never allow an evil sect to stain its name with rumors. Then he tells Director Bake that emotions on both sides got out of control today. Because he had acted recklessly and caused problems, they should remain silent about what happened and look for another day to talk. He reflects that he had been teaching evil martial arts for more than 10 years, and the kid he was trying to fool wasn't him. Suryong asks how dare a martial artist from the evil sect try to use such dirty tricks. The elder calls out to the boy, but he responds, asking if he thought speaking like that would make him scared. The old man simply sighs strangely, falling silent with his eyes half closed. Suryong says that judging by his actions when he was angry and tense, he was only more certain. He questions what group he was from, trying to show dominance while disguised as a village academy. The man laughs menacingly, bursting into laughter in front of the boy, and finally revealing his eyes. People scream, their ears hurting from the elder's laugh. Suryong thinks he had revealed himself, but is surprised as he looks into the smoke, questioning if he had really reached first-class level. The old man's body begins to change, becoming completely youthful and muscular. He calls Suryong a brazen bastard, but acknowledges his perception, so he wants to know how long he could keep up this act. The people in the crowd say the atmosphere feels strange and plan to go home, but the instructor from the demonic sect notices, stomping his foot hard on the ground, and declaring that from this moment forward, anyone who takes another step will lose their life. People run, begging for help only to be blocked by the guards, screaming that they saw nothing and won't say anything, but Suryong is simply unsettled by this, asking if he really intended to take the lives of civilians. The man from the evil sect admits he couldn't deny that. Suryong wonders if he's serious, since he wants to take the lives of people with no value. Muhyun suddenly calls out to his son, drawing his sword as he says that all the respect he needed to show has ended, and everything would now be left in the past. He prepares for battle and orders his son to stand behind him, saying ambition is good, but it's impossible for him to face them head-on, and Suryong tries to argue. Jin signals with his head toward the elder, so Muhyun says he'll handle things from here on. The academy director charges forward, saying he can't look at anyone else while in a fight, thus beginning a sword clash with Muhyun. He is forced to retreat due to Jin's strength. His sword trembling, he is caught off guard. Jin charges again with an aerial strike, shouting that they will fight, landing a heavy blow on Muhyun. He yells at Suryong to run, since this isn't someone he can fight against, all while thinking he can't reveal his skills. Suryong wonders if he was worried about him, so he decides it's best to end this as quickly as possible. The elder approaches, asking if the boy was as skilled as he was loud, emerging from the ground while laughing and appearing behind Suryong. He turns around, thinking he's in trouble, dodging the elder's punch. The man shouts that he looked like a rat with its tail on fire, while Suryong evades all of his attacks. Suryong notices that his movements are getting slower. He was leaving himself wide open, and with a smile, the boy thanks him for that. The elder yells that there's no need to be afraid, because after killing him, he'll enjoy it slowly, while the boy notes that he's slow and full of openings, landing a kick to his chest. The elder is pushed back, groaning from the hit while Suryong smiles. He shouts that he won't let his guard down again, but coins are thrown at him, striking his blocking hand. Suryong approaches, asking if he knew that this wasn't the first time his body survived without internal energy. The elder strikes to the side, asking what nonsense that was, but Suryong dodges, landing a punch on the man's elbow. He reflects that he had been waiting for this because the man's body was too tough no matter how hard he hit, so he just needed one opening to paralyze him. Landing a punch on his back, he says he'll win if he pulls off this move. The man is paralyzed as Suryong moves in front of him, grabbing his head with both hands and slamming his knee into his face. Suryong says it would be a shame to take his life with a single strike, landing another knee to the man's nose, saying that twice was much easier, making blood pour from his nose. The man escapes Suryong's grip, calling him clumsy as the boy steps back, stomping the ground hard and charging again, saying it wasn't over yet. The elder's whole body starts trembling from the blows. Suryong asks if it's over already, but the brute charges again to try and land a hit. The boy reflects that he was using his internal energy to protect his weak spots. That man roars that he'll take Suryong's life. Baek, however, sets a combat stance and says he finished sealing the meridians, watching the man's charge as he says he'll never let him escape, but he simply dodges, saying he's an idiot. There are plenty just like him. The man groans in pain from missing his strikes and being covered in blood. Suryong lands several punches to his face, reflecting on how he had been looked down on by many of the disciples he taught, even his peers, all because he couldn't use internal energy. But it didn't matter if they learned some fancy internal energy technique, they became arrogant and ignored him, asking if they thought they were superior just for being normal. He lands a punch to the man's face. The man tries to counter using his hands, and Suryong asks if that was all he knew how to do. He appears behind him to deliver an elbow strike, saying that's how it's done, crushing the elder's skull. The man falls to the ground, kneeling in front of Suryong, then faceplants onto the ground. He sighs a little while facing the man, noticing some bleeding from his own nose. Suryong says he's overloading his body, though it would be better if he could just fix it. But a shadow appears behind him, trying to land a hit on the boy while saying he'll take his life, and Suryong is too late to dodge. Muhyun stops the strike to his son, cutting off the man's hand. The severed hand hits the ground. The man turns to his son and asks if he's okay. Suryong says it would be impossible to be better than he is now, but he looks to the side to witness the end of the battle, reflecting that this was expected of a true first-class warrior. Wondering if his father had been hiding his skills, Suryong calls for his father, saying that they confessed everything and there were plenty of witnesses here, so they should take them to the Murem Alliance to finish the job. The crowd cheers, calling out Baek Suryong's and Baek Muhyun's names for defeating the evil sect, while the two smile at each other in recognition. Muhyun calls for his son, who quickly responds. The director says they have a lot to talk about once they return, but Suryong suddenly collapses to the ground. He catches his son, worried, while Suryong says he's just going to sleep a bit, reflecting that this body is weak. Muhyun calls out to his son again, as Suryong simply closes his eyes. And so, a few days passed since the Jin Academy incident. The disciples remain in horse stance, complaining that they're tired and hate this. Kang calls out for his mom. The boys whisper among themselves, wondering if they should run away while their master is sleeping, but Suryong can hear them. Kang asks if they can't endure this to become strong like their master. Suryong mentally agrees with his student, but the other boys whisper that he looks weak, while Baek grumbles about the brats. Kang defends that his master is super strong and drove away the evil sect in the blink of an eye, because when his master swings his arm, the wind explodes, and when his feet roll, the ground trembles. He throws a punch, imitating his master, saying he shattered a rock with one hit, and Suryong thinks he's exaggerating. Kang says his master can fly, but Baek thinks he doesn't even have internal energy to do basic things. The student whispers to the others, saying that his master is the strongest in seclusion, because he knows the strongest technique in the martial world, and if they wait a bit longer, he'll teach it to them too. Suryong thinks he got that one right, because he really does know the 5 strongest techniques in the martial world, but he doesn't plan on teaching them. He'd rather master them on his own. And if there's ever a chance to find a successor and pass them on according to his wishes, he will. But he still feels unsure, saying it would be nice if there were some suitable people, but if there aren't, that's normal too. Kang keeps talking about his master, but Suryong interrupts, asking why their training was so noisy, wanting to know if the boys were just playing around. Suryong doesn't hit them or leave them hungry for not learning martial arts, nor are they expelled or left behind for poor performance, telling Kane to hold the stance properly. Since it's a rural village that doesn't mind the strong smell of blood, they have high-quality water and air. Shouryang feels envious of them for learning martial arts so quickly, but they're interrupted by Muhim apologizing and saying he'll end the training now. The students greet the academy director, while Shouryang notices the strange expression on his father's face, asking if something happened. Muhim takes a deep breath to tell his son, because someone from the Mirim Alliance had arrived. Gu Jueyol from the Ganseo Investigation Branch introduces himself to both of them. Muhim introduces himself as Master Bai Unjik and says he's heard a lot about him. Shouryang thinks over the name in his head, looking at Jueyol's feet, and asks if he was a foot or light-based martial artist, to which the man says that's an exaggeration. Baek Mukiman says that unfortunately his martial arts weren't good enough to earn a title, and Shouryang wonders why he's being like that. Shouryang imitates his father to annoy him, but Muhim mutters that he's being a jerk. Jueyol says both of them are humble, and that they were the ones who identified and defeated the evil sect, so they're better than him. Muhim tries to stay humble, saying it was just luck, though uneasily. Jueyol agrees with him strangely, but asks if Muhim hadn't met him before. Muhim says he doesn't remember and that his memory isn't great. Then Jueyol suddenly steps closer, asking if they can get a little water, since the journey was long. Suspicious, Muhim says he's made him stand for too long and will take him inside. Though the academy is small, he can offer him tea. Jueyol smiles and says he'll gladly accept, because they have some things to discuss, and tells his soldiers to head to the basement to retrieve the bodies. The soldiers disperse, agreeing with their leader. Jueyol keeps smiling at Muhim and his son. Shouryang is surprised by the official's attitude, noticing that something doesn't seem right. Inside the academy, Jueyol drinks the tea and says it's very good, but explains to both of them that he has a secret that can't be revealed to anyone outside, because the two from Jin Academy were pawns of the blood cult. Shouryang is surprised and asks if the blood core was still around. Muhim questions if they hadn't disappeared decades ago. Jueyol agrees and explains that the cult was scattered due to internal conflicts, and the alliance leader seized the opportunity to defeat them. Shouryang knew a bit about the fall of the blood cult, but from their conversation he now understood what happened after his reincarnation, since internal conflicts must have happened after the 4 absolute masters, and he lost their lives, although he already knew that part. Jueyol says that recently they discovered movements from descendants of the cult. Muhim asks if that means the cult is being revived. The investigator looks at him seriously. Shouryang is surprised by his aura, realizing he was being stared at, as Jueyol says there is a possibility. He narrows his eyes, asking if they had heard anything strange from the 2 men who were defeated. Muhim says he's not sure since he didn't interact with them after locking them in the basement, and Shouryang agrees with him. Jueyol smiles again and says he understands. Therefore, the Mirim Alliance has been monitoring the evil sect's movements, and if there's ever a need to report anything, he would be grateful to hear it, because the Alliance is offering a reward due to the incident. Muhim says he didn't do it for a reward, but Shouryang notices that, judging by the inspector's reactions, he seems relaxed but on high alert. Jueyol says the place is small and cozy. His hands are positioned to draw his sword at any moment, and his feet are tense. Shouryang wonders why he's so suspicious. Was it because a rural academy master managed to capture someone from the evil sect, or was it because they discovered techniques from the evil sect were being taught to students? Shouryang denies it and thinks that because of this old man, he was acting strange, and that he was hiding something, wondering if they're suspicious because they might be descendants of the blood cult. Jueyol says that Mr. Baek's voice sounded familiar to him. Muhim tries to deflect, saying his voice is pretty common, but the man looks back and agrees. Shouryang realizes he's being intimidated to the point that it's hard to breathe. It had been some time since he last felt this nervous. Jueyol says he's seen his face before, saying that he finally remembered. Muhim complains that he's been caught, and Shouryang asks what's going on. Jueyol shoots up from the ground quickly, saying that's why he looked familiar, appearing next to Muhim in a second. The two smile at each other, while Shouryang thinks he was too fast to stop and tries to save his father. Jueyol places a hand on Muhim's shoulder, saying he had doubted who he was, asking if he was the handsome knight, and Muhim replies that it's been a while since he saw his hyun. Shouryang asks what handsome knight even means. Jueyol said it's been a long time since he's seen his friend. Muhim adds that it's been 30 years, and he never imagined his friend would show up as the head of the Alliance's investigation team. Jueyol asks if he knew from the beginning and pretended not to, and Baek admits he left school like he was running away and didn't speak to him for a long time. His friend says that wasn't fair, they were best friends, and if he says things like that, he'll get sad. Muhim apologizes to his friend, then asks his son to get more drinks, telling him to greet Jueyol properly, since he was like a brother to him back in school, and his friend jokes that he's tall and handsome and doesn't look like his friend anymore. Muhim tries to be humble, saying he's almost 50, but the investigator says if anyone didn't know the handsome knight from their school, they had to be a spy. Shouryong thinks it's a relief there wasn't a fight, but introduces himself, and Joyeol tells him to sit down. They're drinking wine. And so, at Back Academy, the story of their school life from over 20 years ago began. Shouryong notices there are now 5 major academies, while in his time there was only the Celestial Academy. Things had changed a lot. Joyeol puts an arm around Shouryong's shoulder, asking if he knows how many hearts his father broke back in school. Muhyum gets embarrassed as that's brought up in front of his son, but Joyeol says he's still handsome, but back then he was so much more, to the point he earned the title of Handsome Knight. Shouryong teases his father, asking if he's embarrassed and says he didn't have a nickname, thinking it's ridiculous to be called that at 50. Muhyum says the nickname came from his friends, but it wasn't a title, so he always claimed he didn't have one. One of the soldiers enters the room, calling out to the team leader, then reports that the transfer of the cult members is complete, and Joyeol praises the good work. He says he has something to investigate and will return in the morning to inform them. Then the team leaves the room, agreeing with their commander. Joyeol asks if they should start drinking, and the 3 stay together. The head of investigation sets his cup on the table. Already drunk, he calls out to his little brother, and Muhyum responds. Joyeol looks at his cup uneasily, saying he hasn't seen Yakbing, and asks if something happened. Muhyum says it's been some time since his wife went to heaven. Joyeol takes a moment and says she was very delicate, but the two exchange an awkward glance. Joyeol changes the subject, saying he was mistaken. He definitely didn't remember him, but saw his brother on the criminal list. Muhyum says he was nearly punished. Then his friend agrees, saying he almost lost his life to the unbeatable swordsmanship. He asks if the academy makes any money since it doesn't seem to be in great condition. Muhyum replies that it's just enough for 2 people to eat and live. Joyeol says he should be proud. They were fated to meet again, and asks if he wants to teach there, because with his skills he could be a professor at an academy. Shouryong is surprised at the idea of teaching at the Indigo Dragon Academy. Muhyum says this place is good, and Joyeol responds that youth is different, because even if you're strong, without money, you'll starve. Shouryong agrees with his uncle in his head. Then Go continues, saying the pay for instructors is outrageous, so he could get rich being a teacher at one of the 5 academies. Muhyum tries to be modest, asking if his skill is good enough, but Shouryong thinks it obviously is. Joyeol calls him stubborn and asks if his skills have been buried, because even his face would make students line up, and Shouryong thinks he's not going to let that go, apologizing for interrupting the conversation. Joyeol is surprised by his nephew, but the boy asks what a star instructor is, and they begin to explain. The next morning, Joyeol is hungover and complains that it feels like he's crossing to the afterlife. Shouryong approaches, offering honey he collected to cure the hangover, and Joyeol thanks him. Muhyum asks about his honey water, but his son says that was the last one, while the father asks if he couldn't have split it into 2 cups. Ryong says that doing so would reduce its effectiveness, and it was better to give it to the guest, asking if he was jealous of his brother. Joyeol hits Muhyum on the head, saying he raised his son well. Shouryong thinks his uncle was a cool guy, because he met with his father who hadn't been doing well after cutting ties, but it was clear how happy he was to see his dad. So if you got to know him, you'd see he's a great person. Joyeol puts on his coat and says it's best he heads out, but he calls his nephew, asking if he thought about what was said the night before, and Reincarnation was still thinking. He says there were still 3 months left, so Shouryong didn't need to decide now. When he wants to, he just has to ask for the letter of recommendation. The young man thanks his uncle, and he asks what he meant by thank you. Since when a party drags on too long, it's bound to get boring, so it's best to leave. The door opens for him to go out. Muhyum asks his Hyung Nim to take care, and Reincarnation does the same, while Joyeol thanks them both, because next time he'd bring wine and they'd drink until they dropped. He steps forward, soaring swiftly with a smile. Muhyum and Shouryong fall silent. The young man says he'll make the morning coffee, but his father calls him. Shouryong asks what he wants. Then Muhyum questions if he really plans to go to the Indigo Dragon Academy. He asks if his father would stop him if he said yes. Muhyum responds that even if he tried to stop him, his son wouldn't listen. Shouryong says that's what he figured, but his father asks if he wouldn't give up, because Rim isn't the world he longs for, and the boy replies that he knows that. His father yells, asking what he even knows from beating a few weaklings by chance, and says that if they hadn't let their guard down, it would have been a meaningless fight, because he devoted everything to fixing the power his son lacked since birth, but his body couldn't be repaired. Shouryong agrees with him on that, but his father says that despite that, he still wants to enter the Indigo Dragon Academy. Shouryong asks about enrolling. Muhyum says he'll be bullied for not having ki, and lots of people will want to beat him up. His son tries to argue, but the father tells him to listen, because no one could cure his illness, and they couldn't even figure out what it was called. The young man thinks to himself that he knows the name and how to cure it, but the problem is he invested a lot of money into it. Muhyum asks him to listen because he'd be 27 this year, and the academy only accepts up to 15, but he still wants to get beaten up by kids, so he should find a beautiful girl and get married. While Suryong asks what he's talking about, he's not going to enroll. Muhyum is surprised and finishes his line about having a child, wondering if his son really won't enroll. Suryong says that's why his father should drink moderately. He doesn't even remember what he said last night, because he's going to get money, startling his father. The young man says he's going to apply, and after hearing about it, it sounds like a place where he can make use of his abilities. Muhyum asks if it really is a workplace, but Suryong just lets out a deep sigh, saying his father should live in luxury thanks to him until the end of the year. He remembers his training in his past life while using the 18 outlaw ceremony strikes. The king of the forest lands a punch, saying he's way too slow, because his student should be much faster, since he'd be in trouble if he died before his student mastered the 18 outlaw ceremony strikes. Suryong slams into the wall, saying it's not time yet. Advancing with his footwork, he yells that it's not over yet, but the king of the forest puts a fist in front of him, saying he could have taken his head off. He needs to do it right. Suryong says he understands, master. After the training, Mang says they'll stop for today, and Suryong asks why. His teacher says he's going to tell him where he hid his elixirs and treasures, so he should listen. Because he's not saying to go get them, but maybe he is, since one day he'll die, and when Suryong escapes, he should use them. The young man says that's killing his appetite, but his master asks if he'd rather let his treasures sit until they turn to dust. Then the two stare at each other in silence. Mang smiles at his student, and Suryong looks at him seriously. The young man asks if today's meat side dish was only meant for one person, and the king of the forest questions whether he was doing this just for more food. Suryong simply says it looked like there was one more piece of meat today, which makes his master happy, as he asks if Suryong would like to learn another technique. In the middle of a mountain range, Suryong walks tiredly with his master. The young man thinks that he had been well hidden in the depths. Muhyum looks ahead in awe, wondering what that place was, because everything was covered in thick mist, with an entrance that looked like an abyss. Muhyum says he felt a strange aura, and Suryong replies they had come to the right place. His father says that, considering Suryong left everything behind saying he'd learned martial arts, he expected him to do the same, but he doubts there's really an elixir there. Suryong asks if his father lived his whole life in fear, nods, realizing this was it, the location where Mang's territory begins, since based on the markings, the likelihood of the elixirs still being intact was quite high, so he tells his father to proceed with caution. Muhyum says it feels like he's being lured in by a ghost. As he silently follows his son, Muhyum steps on unstable ground. Suryong notices the strange energy. Then, at last, the two enter the portal. His father suddenly starts speaking and pointing at something. Suryong looks ahead and notices it too. There was a summer house there. The young man comments that he really was right, thanking Master Mang for leaving the elixirs and saying they were well hidden, while his father says the rumors were true, but quickly denies it, because the rule of Mirim practitioners was to never lower their guard until the very end, and they couldn't know if there were traps there. Suryong says there wouldn't be traps and tries to finish his sentence, surprising his father with a murderous intent. Muhyum asks what that was, but his son tells him to show his skills. The master asks what skills he's talking about, as the tiger immediately charges forward to slash him. Muhyum looks back surprised, blocking the blows with his sword. Then the tiger slashes again, forcing the master to retreat. It roars as Suryong thinks that Master Mang had left behind a little cub, but now it had grown into a monster. So once again, he had to listen to stories from decades ago. Muhyum asks his son how this happened, but the boy replies that the pharmacist said that instead of a trap, it could be a monster. His father, disappointed, questions if he couldn't have said that a bit earlier. Suryong says he wasn't sure it would actually be one, as the tiger charges again. Muhyum prepares for battle, but the creature slashes the ground, releasing its aura. The man says that, judging by the claimed territory, if they leave the area, the tiger won't follow. Suryong thinks that puts him in a tight spot because he brought his father here precisely to face the tiger, so he says that if they sell its pelt, winter won't be so harsh. Muhyum gets excited but says it was a bit too big. Still, he takes a deep breath and prepares to fight, drawing his sword and saying that being poor is a sin. Suryong tries to encourage his father, saying he'd pray for his success. Muhyum lifts off the ground, eager to see how the fight would end, aiming to strike the tiger's head. The creature roars again as it sees the man, striking the sword with its paw, and throwing Muhyum far back. The man charges again with his sword, saying this was expected of a spiritual beast, but it was nothing more than a monster, landing a blow to its abdomen. He says he probably cut it, but the tiger roars again at the man, who retreats after being attacked. But the tiger grabs a tree, bringing it crashing to the ground. Suryong thinks that with that kind of strength, even iron armor would collapse, since even a mid-tier first-class knight or a hunter wouldn't be able to see it coming. But still, the man, his father, was a first-class knight who had reached maturity, while Muhyum complains the hide was too thick. This was the first time seeing his father fight with full strength, and he says that no matter how much he struck, the tiger wouldn't die. A spiritual beast was no easy foe, since the fake Namgong from last time had been far too weak for him to show his true abilities. But now he shouldn't mess around. Shouryong asks why he was fighting so stiffly if he could win this fight quickly. Muhyum gets angry and asks if he thought it was that easy, because if he was fighting stiffly, then his son should go fight instead. The boy asks if he should go help, but his father yells that he's fine, and if his son came over, he'd just get in the way, blocking the tiger's strike with the blade of his sword, then deflecting another blow from the beast. The tiger tries to claw at him again, but Muhyum channels aura into his sword and says that if this keeps up, he'll lose his composure in front of his son, so he's going to end it now. Shouryong notices his father's sword movements are a bit rigid, and that if he charges in that fast, his father will never win the battle. Muhyum prepares to attack again with the sword, shouting that this will be the end as he slashes at the tiger. But he thinks he's grown old, feeling the strain just from wielding the sword. Shouryong shouts to warn his father that the tiger is behind him. Muhyum is caught off guard by the warning. The tiger throws the man far back. He crashes into a wall with his back, screaming in pain from the hit. Shouryong runs to help his father against the tiger, throwing a stone and yelling for the beast to go away. The stone hits the tiger's arm. Shouryong reaches his father and asks if he's okay, but Muhyum says his son would just be a burden, and since it's too dangerous, he shouldn't interfere. However, Shouryong questions what he's talking about, because saying that while limping, no one would believe him, and if his father dies, so does he. Muhyum tells his son to run, but Shouryong tells him to stop talking nonsense. Then both are stunned by a sudden pressure. The tiger is bleeding from its stomach and releases a purple key, leaving both father and son uneasy. Shouryong tells him to fight calmly because he'll provide cover. Muhyum is surprised and asks about his son, but the young man picks up a rock from the ground, saying that this way his chances of survival would be higher. Muhyum lets out a deep sigh at his son's decision. Shouryong tells him not to use sword techniques anymore, just to aim at the tiger's sides, while his father complains, because he already knew everything his son was saying. He shouts as he lands a blow, causing a massive explosion in the area. Shouryong searches the tiger's body and says he found it, showing his father a golden stone, because it was an inner pearl from a spiritual beast, though not as big as he had expected, but still fairly large, and capturing a spirit beast with their skills was nearly impossible. Now that they'd solved the problem, they should head to the summer house. Muhyum says he wants to finish quickly and go rest, while Shouryong thinks he had misjudged, because he was sure his father had reached the peak of his power, but something was holding him back. Then his father calls him over, and Shouryong asks if there's something there. Muhyum says that just by looking at these leaves, it feels like 100 years have passed. Shouryong thinks he already knew that, and if it were just a normal elixir, Mang wouldn't have gone to all this trouble for him to get it. The young man says it's done. Muhyum agrees because it was a rare elixir, while Shouryong thinks that when it comes to fixing Ki, this wouldn't be enough, as the energy of this elixir was so tiny. But that's only because his father doesn't know how to process the elixir. Shouryong, on the other hand, knows the necessary process. The problem is, it requires money, because even if he sold all these roots, he'd still need more. So first he needs to train a body capable of earning money, asking his father if he can eat all of this. Muhyum allows his son to do it, leaving Shouryong stunned, but he teases his father, saying an old man would have eaten it. So Muhyum hits him, calling him an idiot, telling him to hurry up and eat already. Shouryong looks ahead with a smile, saying this would be enough to begin altering his constitution. Then he mentions there's also a spa here. Shouryong asks if they should take a bath, but his father says it's not necessary. The boy tries to convince his father since the water looked nice, but he notices something strange nearby. Mang says there's a fantastic spa near the cabin. Shouryong asks if it's the kind where if he trains inside, his ki will increase or his fatigue will vanish so he can train endlessly. But Mang denies it, asking if he really thought a treasure would be left lying around the mountain, since if that were the case, every Murem bandit would have already tried to steal it. Shouryong tells him to just say what it is already, but switches tactics to a bribe, saying dinner is meat, and if he eats it, he'll ruin his teeth. Mang gets up and calls his student an idiot. The young man remembers the sensation, and Muhyum asks if his son is feeling okay, since the treasure was right before Shouryong's eyes. But his master had no interest in weapons. He says that Hazuo wasn't the problem right now, and Muhyum asks what he means. Shouryong points ahead, telling his father to look, because in his previous life, he saw a metal that gave him the same sensation, something he could never forget. the metal that pierced his heart. Shurion was sure it was used to forge swords for demonic cults. Starfall, the metal of legends. It's a type of metallic ore found only at the site of a meteor impact, something only those with heaven-sent luck could obtain. Weapons made of starfall are used by masters, and depending on the wielder's skill, can become celestial weapons capable of piercing the heavens. If the sword that fell into the hands of the blood cult hadn't been made of starfall, or if he'd had even a similar sword, he wouldn't have lost his life. But he changes his thoughts and says it's useless, because what mattered was the material he had with him now. Muhiem asks what made him jump into the river fully clothed, while Shurion reflects that it's better to tell the truth than lose trust through a lie. So he says it was starfall, but Muhiem doesn't believe him. The boy asks if his father thinks he's joking, but the man becomes uneasy. Shurion says it's getting dark and they should head down the mountain, but Muhiem replies that a treasure no one can take responsibility for only brings division. And if this really is starfall, it's something they cannot take responsibility for, because if it's exposed, much blood will be shed by those who seek it, and even they, the finders, won't be safe. Shurion thinks that's true, but says they could just keep the metal. While his father complains that he's trying to start a war by doing something so dangerous, Shurion replies that even if they left it there, someone would eventually find it. And since the mountain isn't far from the village, warriors who hear about it would come running. Not just proper sects, but evil cults too, and even people who draw their sword at the slightest reason, asking if his father could stop all of them. Muhiem looks at his son, uneasy, but the boy continues, saying that if they just leave it in a room, no one will know. People will think they just picked up a pretty-looking rock, so the father agrees. Shurion is surprised by how quickly his father gave in, but the old man says that if he said no, his son would just throw himself on the ground and throw a tantrum. So they'll take it, and like his son said, they'll simply hide it. Shurion wraps the stone in a piece of cloth, saying he wants to bow before Master Manghazuo and the starfall ore, then asks what he should do with the ore and whether he should forge a weapon, because he could make several weapons by mixing in other ores or craft a smaller weapon made entirely of starfall. Muhiem hits him, telling him to stop laughing, so Shurion coughs a little, but then asks if they should head back. Muhiem tells him not to use the elixirs until they return, and Shurion tells him to sell the tiger for a good price. His father agrees. The boy tells him to have a good trip. That's what he said as he turned away. He says the celestial arts he would now perform are martial techniques that go against the laws of nature, and the key method was also different from normal ones, seen by ordinary warriors as something close to a demonic art, wondering if it wouldn't be better to do it now and face the consequences later. Thanking the food as he drinks from the bowl, he feels a strange sensation in his body. His insides begin to churn with the ki in his body, making Shurion drop the bowl, agonizing in pain as he clutches his neck. The boy grabs at his chest. As his hand becomes covered in purple veins, he thinks this is the first step, falling to the ground in a lotus position, and beginning to cultivate his ki. Shurion recites several incantations from the cultivation method, shouting for the ki in his body to move. The energy gradually begins to stabilize. He reflects that he reached this point in the past, since the blood flow in his 8 secondary meridians was blocked by a large amount of corrupted ki. Just that corrupted ki would have been enough to end his life before turning 30, but he decides he'll compete with the energy to see who wins. Power surges through the room, slamming against the walls. Shurion clasps his hands together once more. The veins on his neck bulge visibly. He can only groan, trying to endure the pain, screaming next with blood pouring from his eyes. A vein in his arm bursts. The boy thinks that if he loses consciousness now, it's all over. Then he screams again, trying to expel the contaminated ki. The roof of his house cracks open, along with trees that begin to shake. Shurion opens his blue eyes, sighing as everything returns to normal. He says he succeeded, because he managed to form an internal Dan within his body. The strength in his fingers felt completely different from before. But all of this was just the beginning of his cultivation journey. He walks over to some training dummies, sighing again. Shurion thinks that using the stimulation from the herb, he reached the first stage of the heaven-defying divine art. And if he wants to reach a higher level, he'll need many more elixirs and formations. And at the very least, his lifespan increased by 3 years after reaching the first star. Even so, he couldn't train the heaven-defying divine art just yet and decides that his body needs to become stronger before handling such powerful ki. Therefore, his first task was to solve this problem and turn this weak body into something indestructible. Using the 18 outlaw strikes of Manhwa, the rogue of the lone martial king, there was no better martial art than that for body training. He strikes the air with his palm, then follows with a straight line blow, throwing a punch forward. Shurion trains the entire day. He says he can only train as much as his body can handle, since that was his current limitation, so he decides he'll keep training until his father returns home. Because once he masters the first half of the 18 outlaw strikes, he'll be able to gain his 6th sense, and as he continues training, he'll be able to master the second half too, and at that point, he'll surpass even the king of the forest in external arts. But he wonders if he'd be satisfied with just that, because he still had the martial arts of the Mad Demon, the divine arts of the Ice Moon Goddess, the Sword Master's techniques, and the heaven-defying divine art, wondering how powerful he would become if he mastered them all, since he would undoubtedly become the strongest beneath the heavens. At sunset, Muhum shouts to announce he has returned, asking if his son knows how much he sold the tiger for, because it would make his jaw drop. However, he finds Suryong collapsed on the ground. Suryong says his father is back, and he asks what happened to his son, and if he'd been like that the whole time. The boy says the medicine was a bit stronger than he expected. His father says he ate the hazuo on his own, but the boy tries to deny it. Muhim asks if he didn't order him to wait until he came back because it was dangerous to eat it alone. And since his son didn't listen even after being warned, he picks up a wooden stick. Suryong begs him not to solve this with violence. Muhim chases after his son while Suryong tells him to calm down and listen. Though he was beaten until he became a mushy mess, their lives returned to normal soon after that. Every morning and night, he meditated, concentrating the contaminated ki in his internal Dan. He also strengthened his body and increased his flexibility using the 18 outlaw strikes. Then finally, the awaited day arrived, with a letter delivered to the young man. He received a letter from Gu Joyeol regarding something he had asked about earlier. Excited, Suryong quickly opens the letter, because now the Blue Dragon Academy was recruiting new instructors. A crowd gathers at the academy. Two men comment to each other that this was the fight of the century, and if the son loses, the father will let him go to the capital. Suryong takes a deep breath, ready to fight, asking if this was the skill test before leaving, and wondering which village he would keep spreading rumors in. Because even when the Yuji kids from the neighborhood took the mansion exam, people didn't gather like this. Muhim says that if he doesn't want to embarrass himself, he simply shouldn't do it. Suryong replies that he can't just back out, then tosses his bag to Jang, asking him to hold it. Jang falls to the ground, holding his master's bag. Muhim asks him to reconsider once more, but Suryong had already made his decision. The father reminds him that he said a month ago that even children had passed the first phase, and that he likely doesn't have the skills to teach them. However, Suryong replies that he does, because he's not the same person he was a month ago. Muhim complains that there's no reasoning with him, and his son asks if he sounds like he's bragging, because he's going to prove himself to his father. The old man accepts his son's decision, but draws his sword, saying he wants to see just how much he's improved without using his internal ki. Suryong notices that the first move seemed to cut swiftly, with a wild wind. This was the spinning wind sword. Muhim says that judging by his son's stance, he's been training. As Suryong charges from the ground, clashing swords with his father and saying he'll have to use internal ki. Muhim moves backward. The entire crowd is amazed by Suryong's strength, shouting that their master is incredible. Suryong asks his father to wait, because he noticed something missing in his sword technique and wants to help fill that gap. Muhim becomes furious at his son, charging forward while calling him an idiot, attacking him because that's not something you say to your father. Under pressure, Suryong wonders if he provoked him unnecessarily. Muhim aims for his son's shoulder, saying he's fast, but Suryong sees the sword's path, blocking his father's strike. Muhim looks at him angrily for the provocation, aiming to strike his son's knee, spinning his wrist along with the sword. Suryong barely manages to block the strike, thinking that because it's a constantly shifting technique, it's impossible to predict. If things continued this way, he'd lose, so he decides to fall back and think. The crowd shouts that the battle is amazing. Suryong complains that he's the only one who feels like he might die, but his father tells him to say he gives up now, because if the fight drags on, he'll just end up hurt. The boy looks on silently. Muhim charges again, saying he still hasn't come to his senses, landing a downward blow on Suryong's sword. The young man grips his sword tightly and says it's not easy to endure, because he feels like he's about to lose his weapon. But he decides he'll hold on, because if he keeps blocking like this, any technique will eventually become visible to the naked eye, especially if they're the same ones he saw being used in training last month. Suryong sees the sword's trajectory. He clashes swords with his father again, forcing Muhim to step back from the impact. The old man drives his sword into the ground, asking how that was even possible. Suryong simply asks if that was it, because this time he'll take the first step, charging at his father. Muhim rushes forward too, yelling for him to try if he can. The two clash swords once more. Suryong aims for his father's eye. Muhim dodges the blade, yelling that it's crap. The boy notices that his father put all his strength into his already tired body, since the spinning wind sword technique is a free-flowing style, also known as the phantom sword. That wasn't where he should be focusing his power. Suryong stops the sword just before hitting, kicking up a burst of dust behind him. Muhim finds himself under pressure from his son, but the boy says that his mother's passing was not his father's fault. Muhim is left speechless by the statement. Shounen says that being born weak also wasn't his fault, that he wasn't a burden his father had to carry for the rest of his life, and Muhim asks what he's talking about, and whoever said his son was a burden to him as he moves his sword. Shounen simply dodges the strike, ducking low to counterattack. He places his sword against his father's chest, breaking the chains around his heart, then says this is the end. Muhim is speechless before his son, but Shounen tells him not to pity him, thinking that his father had felt broken and repressed his emotions because of his wife and weak son, locking himself away and forgetting how to soar. But now he hopes his father finds freedom, because he has the talent to go far. They stand facing each other, both smiling. Muhim admits defeat and says his son can go. The crowd cheers for their master, wondering what just happened. As the children jump around, congratulating Shounen, some villagers hand him food for his journey, and one child promises to find him again. But they ask Master Bake how he could give up so easily and let his son go. The face that looked back appeared a little tired, but also refreshed. Muhim tells his son to earn lots of money and return after he's improved, while Shounen tells him not to let this place burn down before he's back. The father calls him an idiot, but the boy prepares to leave, so the man watches his departure, but asks his son that once he reaches the Indigo Dragon Academy, he should know that his maternal grandfather will be there. Shounen asks what he's trying to say, but Muhim explains that his grandfather is the head instructor at the academy. The boy gets excited and says his father only told him at the last second. However, seeing the uneasy look, he asks if something happened. Muhim says yes. It's been a while since his mother and the old man grew distant. Shounen asks since when, and his father says it's been since he married her. Excited, the boy comments that it's been 30 years. But since so much time has passed, he must have changed, and yet his father still calls him the old man, while Muhim questions whether someone can really be left behind like that. Either way, he didn't know how the grandfather would react. He might love Shounen for looking like his mother, or try to take his life for looking like his father. But his son should be careful, because if he sees a man named Mei Jukrien, he should run. Shounen says he's going to stop listening now, thinking that his grandfather might actually kill his own grandson. Muhim asks if his son wants him to go along, because if he goes, the man probably won't kill him since they could just run away. Shounen asks his father to calm down because he had already decided he would face all the consequences, and until he returned, his father should take care of himself. Muhim lets go of his son's hand, letting him go without saying a word, then shouts for him to send a letter at least once a month, and if he doesn't, his father will come after him. Shounen just nods to his father, heading off on his way to the academy. Muhim says his son is cold-hearted, since he didn't look back even once. The man had wanted his son to live in his arms until the end of his days, but now he no longer needs that, and that's why he let him go. But a voice says he looks like his father, and will definitely make many girls cry. Muhim replies that he probably will, standing beside the ghost of his wife. He looks to the side, laughing, but his wife turns her face away. Muhim wonders if he should go after him now, thinking that his son was the only gift left to him by his wife before she passed. And like her, his son is brave and troublesome, but he's the one he would give his life to heal. Then he says maybe he should just follow his son secretly and watch from afar. But his wife interrupts, asking what he's doing since he lost the fight. His wife is right. He can't protect him after losing. Maybe he didn't use his full strength, but a loser is still a loser. So Muhim admits he lost to his child, starting to laugh as he cries. He says to Yakbing that their son told him it wasn't his fault she passed away, or that he was born weak. Yakbing asks if he had blamed himself all this time, and Muhim replies yes, because she might have lived longer if she'd never met him. The woman scolds him for even thinking about their son not being born. Muhim apologizes, saying he didn't mean it like that, but his wife tells him their son has already grown. Now all that's left is to let him walk his own path. Muhim whispers his wife's name, crying as he calls out for his son. Later in the small village, the man walks with his sword, grateful that the weight in his heart has lifted, and Yakbing congratulates her husband, asking if now that he doesn't have to take care of his son, he's planning to get married. But Muhim says he plans to train in martial arts to the highest level. Sighing as he releases the wind, he draws his sword with ki, dancing as he cuts through the air, with fluid and untraceable movements. Muhim looks down thoughtful, then closes his eyes, and swings his sword while remembering his wife calling him Jade Prince, though he never thought he was that handsome. Muhim asked who she was and why she was talking about his face while drinking. But Yakbing asked if he'd buy her a drink since they'd met before. The man was surprised by the question. Muhim remembered the first time they met. It wasn't perfect, since she seemed fragile, like she'd break at a touch, but she looked at him with courage and asked for a drink, which somehow made him fall for that fragile woman. He proposed to Yakbing, saying she'd be his only wife, but she said her body was weak and she wouldn't live long. Muhyum didn't care about that. Yakbing assumed he'd remarry once she passed away, but he had no such intention. He also remembered how his father-in-law complained when he asked for his daughter's hand. He said he beat Muhyum to death, but Yakbing defended him, saying she would go with her husband. Annoyed, the old man asked how his daughter could say that. Muhyum managed to survive that time. He remembered that he promised to make Yakbing happy and cure her illness. However, she told him to stop with the sweet talk and take her on a cruise, because she always wanted to do that with the one she loved. Muhyum tells her to get real while swinging his sword. Remembering when Suryong was born and realizing he was a boy who resembled his wife, he was by her side in her final moments. Then Muhyum opens his eyes, thanking his wife, while Yakbing congratulates him, saying now he and his sword look at ease. At the bar, people comment that among the 5 great academies, they heard the facilities and instructors at Jujek Academy were the best. But he studied at Jujek Academy 20 years ago. Another boy replies that he never gets tired of his stories, no matter how many times he tells them. Suryong thinks about burying them while analyzing the people's levels, but the chubby guy says Jade Dragon Academy wants him as an instructor. Suryong asks about the Jade Dragon Academy, while a friend shouts that it's just like his Hyung, and that he's sure the academy will shine thanks to him. The chubby guy says he'll become an instructor and invite his friends, but today the drinks are on him, though they're interrupted by someone calling him an idiot, asking if he really thinks the academy would invite a loud pig who drinks like him to be an instructor. Even if Jade Dragon lacked talent, this would be too much. Suryong notices that by the man's aura, he's a master. A friend yells that he's crazy and doesn't know who that is, but the chubby guy tells his friends to stop, thinking that if they offend that person, they could lose their lives. The man asks why they're silent when they were just chatting away. The friends fall quiet under his command. Suryong thinks this is the first time he's encountered such a presence after acquiring this body, and the man must be in his 20s. He's already a master at that age. He's likely either a genius or backed by a powerful family. His behavior fits both. The chubby guy apologizes for getting carried away because of the alcohol and thanks him for helping him sober up. However, the man turns and says that in any case, there's no empty seat at the inn, and he can't walk farther because his legs hurt. The chubby guys are startled by the man's threat, so they say they were already about to leave and the man can have their seat. The inn's residents thank him for the help and say the young man is amazing. Suryong looks downcast because he was expecting a fight out of boredom. The man pulls out the chair and says they didn't plan to fight in the end, sitting in front of Suryong and asking how such a cowardly man could be an instructor at Jade Dragon Academy. The boy asks if the man has some business with him, but the man says he's interested in him, because when he started talking to the others, Ryong was the first to react and looked ready to move at any moment, asking if he doesn't think that's enough to spark his curiosity. Suryong thinks he didn't expect it to be so obvious, and this guy was one of the best masters he's ever sensed. He apologizes for the disturbance. The man says that ever since he gave off a killing intent, the response was clear, and he also apologizes for causing confusion. He just sat there to have a drink. Baek stands up and says he'll leave, but the man introduces himself as Aki Yeonho and says he has no nickname because he's new to Kango. Suryong introduces himself and says he has no nickname either, while thinking the man is a young master with an excellent background. Few families in Murem use spears, but Ak, Jo, and Yang were the biggest of them. The Ak spear was the best. Ak Bai, head of the Ak family, was one of the 10 heavenly masters. With a master of that caliber, the family used their name boldly, so Yeonho offers food and drink to Round to stay, but Baek doesn't remember hearing that name. He asks how old Yeonho is. He says he's 25, and Suryong replies that's 2 years younger than him. Now excited, Yeonho asks if he can call Suryong Hyung, so Suryong thinks it's been a while since someone wanted to call him that, and there's nothing wrong with being friendly, so he asks if they should order some alcohol. At the inn's quarters, Yeonho complains that his father was irresponsible, and Ryong says his was too. The young master Ak only trained until his father told him to find direction, while Baek had to convince his dad not to follow him. Suryong asks if that's the reason he came to Kango at his age, and his friend agrees. The boy thinks that's the dumbest reason he's ever heard from someone. Yeonho says his friend came alone and didn't even seem that strong, which makes Ryong angry. Then Ak asks if he's secretly a master, but his friend tells him to think whatever he wants, reflecting that he couldn't feel any ki coming from him, so it was easy to get confused, especially since, while repairing his core, he'd need elixirs, wondering when he'll ever gather enough money for that. Yeonho asks why he left home, and Ryong explains that he's going to try the exam for the Jade Dragon Academy, since his goal is to become an instructor and earn a lot of money. just like Ak. Round asks if he's taking the exam to find direction in life, but Yeonho denies it, saying he just wanted to travel with his friend, because when he's with him, he feels like all sorts of fun things will happen. Round denies it, asking what kind of things he's imagining, but Yeonho offers to accompany him and cover all travel expenses. His friend agrees, saying that once he's sober, they'll stick together. And so the night passes with them talking and drinking. In Nanshan, during the early morning hours, a man is strangled and asks how he could do this. The attacker tells the old man to move on to the afterlife, making him cough up blood. In the morning, Ryan asks if that's Nanchang, noticing it's a busy street. Yeonho says that's to be expected of a big city, and that they should look for a place to stay first, but Baek refuses, saying they have somewhere to stop by first. Go Joyeol greets his nephew, saying it's been a while. He heard from Yuhyum that he was on the way and even wrote a letter of recommendation for Ryong, and the young man thanks him. Joyeol comments that he looks better and asks if the boy next to him is his friend. Ryong nods and says he met him there. Yeonho introduces himself, saying he's new to Gango. Go just greets him and notes that he's a disciple of the Ak family. They had a lot to talk about after all this time apart, but Joyeol had to go, since he's recently been out of touch. Suryeon remarks that he really seems busy, while thinking Joyeol already handled the letter of recommendation. Go says there's something he wants to talk about, and if it's resolved, it would be a big help, asking if the boy would be willing to handle it. Joyeol explains that a recent incident occurred where a civilian lost his life at the hands of a Murim soldier. Ryong repeats, a civilian? But Joyeol clarifies that the techniques used in the murder appeared to be demonic arts from the blood cult, startling Ryong at the mention. Go Joyeol says he's known for having uncovered demonic sect techniques in the past. Though it hasn't been confirmed that they were demon arts, the corpse was so severely damaged it raised suspicions. Suryeon asks if all he had to do was confirm whether they were demon arts, and Joyeol agrees it would also be great if he could capture the culprit. Because if he helps with the case, the Murim Alliance will award him a certificate of appreciation, which would be another achievement on his resume, making Suryeon consider it. Joyeol asks if he's interested, since he can coordinate with the government office, and Baek asks for the chance. Still in Nanchang, Suryeon introduces himself as someone sent by the Martial Arts Alliance. A red-haired man introduces himself as Chung Chien, the chief of police and the one in charge of the case. Suryeon introduces himself as well, and Yeonho does the same. First, they decide to examine the corpse. Shin comments that the body isn't in great condition, while Yeonho feels nauseated. He runs outside, and Suryeon asks why he insisted on coming, thinking that either way, it's understandable to think it was demonic arts, and there was a similar martial art, but he should go see the suspect. Chien removes his mask and asks if he's finished. Suryeon replies that he is, but that he wants to meet the suspects. The police chief suggests they head to the Scarlet Flower Palace, which is a brothel that used to be owned by Elder Hyo, and the first suspect is there. At the Scarlet Flower Palace, a woman screams that she didn't do it. She admits that she argued with the man that day, but says it was just a common quarrel. Suryeon asks if she was really in that kind of relationship with Elder Hyo, and the woman agrees, so Baek wants to know if they argued often. The woman falls silent, but says Elder Hyo told her to leave and let someone else manage the brothel, and even though she refused, he paid for it, but she's the one who made it famous. It was a well-known brothel in Nanchang with good income. Meanwhile, the woman says she loved Elder Hyo, even though she called him a loan shark. Suryeon thanks her for the help, thinking she didn't have the skills necessary for the crime. He decides he'll go question the next suspect, but suddenly someone shouts for the bastards to get out, asking if they knew who he was and ordering the old lady to go outside. A man is thrown through the door, crashing into a table. Chien says there was no need to look for the second suspect. Hyoil, the elder's son, was the second suspect, and he asks why the old woman pretended she wasn't there. The woman gets angry and asks how he dares to cause such a scene there, ordering him to leave immediately. Il says he came to take over the brothel and asks if she had a problem with that. She yells back that the Scarlet Flower Palace belongs to her and that the guard should throw him out immediately. Il is holding a woman in his arms with a sword pointed at her, and several guards behind him. He asks if the old woman doesn't understand the situation, while the woman pleads to be saved. Suryeon reflects that if this man takes over the brothel, it will fall into ruin, but Ak Yeonho remains cold-faced, asking if the others were just going to stand by and watch. Chien comments that it was a family issue, and the government couldn't interfere. Since it was an inviolable matter, the government wouldn't interfere in most conflicts between Murim warriors. Therefore, since they were wielding swords, they were also Murim warriors, and asks if he wasn't a warrior too. Yeonho draws his spear, saying he understood. He charges forward, sending several men flying. Il wonders if the old woman even hired assassins, while Yeonho says not to worry, as he wouldn't take anyone's life. Hyo becomes desperate and pleads to stop and talk, saying he would pay triple what the old woman offered, and it definitely wasn't a small amount, but he would offer even 10 times more, even more than the Scarlet Flower Palace. Yeonho tells him to shut up and asks how he could treat a woman like that, saying he would never forgive him for pointing a sword at her throat. Kneeling after being beaten, Il asks who they are. Shouryong steps closer, catching his attention, reflecting that he had seen countless liars during his time as an instructor. Then asks if he killed Elder Hyo, saying that guy was just third-rate and couldn't even control his own body properly. Il screams that it wasn't him. Shouryong replies that El would benefit more if his father died, and Hyo responds that he wouldn't live much longer anyway, so there was no need to do that, asking if he thought El was his only son. Shouryong asks if there are more sons, as he had heard Il was the only one. Il explains that there were no official children besides him, but only bastards from other relationships outside marriage, asking if the old woman didn't see them too, since those bastards only came to ask for money again, but the woman tells him to shut his mouth. Il snaps back, telling the old woman to shut up as well, but Shouryong strikes the back of his neck, saying there was nothing left to hear and they should get going, asking who the last suspect was. Chien says he would guide Ryong to him. On the way, Yeonho comments that he couldn't understand how a son could say that about his father. Shouryong responds that money decides everything, breaks relationships, and that people can do anything for money, thinking that for money he needed to get into the Jade Dragon Academy, and it was best to proceed calmly. So they were going to meet the last suspect. A giant man with an eye patch says he didn't kill Elder Hyo. Shouryong reflects that he said that, but his appearance alone was already highly suspicious. Then he tells Bakwin-kun's side that, aside from that, his records as a Ronin were impressive. Bakwin-kun says it's true he was a young Ronin, but changed after getting married. Shouryong asks if he became a loan shark's pawn instead of a Ronin, leaving the man uneasy, but he replies that it was hard to find a normal job with his face, and Elder Hyo was his benefactor. Chien says he's not so sure about that, as there's no guarantee everything he's saying is true. Shouryong reflects that he was the most suspicious of the three, and Bakwin-kun says he didn't do it, but Chien asks if he found Hyo's will. Baek thinks about the will, but Chien reveals that the hair of Elder Hyo was written in it. Shouryong asks why he hadn't mentioned the will, and Chien replies that if rumors spread, chaos would follow. Baek calls him Pari Nim, and Chien, annoyed, turns to him. The young man says that in that case, even the Murim world was watching because there's a chance a civilian was taken down by demonic arts, and Chien understood. Shouryong says maybe he didn't like them since they suddenly joined the investigation, but he asked Chien to help find the culprit. Podu said he understood and that they would go to the crime scene the next day. Shouryong thought he wouldn't let his guard down until the end. Yeonho questioned why his Hyung was talking like that behind Podu's back, and Shouryong replied it was a habit. He reflected that he was analyzing others and taking notes, having survived many years in the blood cult thanks to that habit. From back Shouryong's lodging, he said the culprit's logic was flawed because even if he didn't kill directly, he could have ordered someone, and the will was full of suspicious things. The demonic traces were troubling, and if it were something ordinary, it would be the blood cult, making him feel dragged into something more troublesome than he imagined. Yeonho suddenly opened the door, warning that there was a problem. Shouryong stood up, wanting to know why he was so agitated in the middle of the night, but Yeonho said that Mr. Hyo's house was on fire. They rushed to the burning building. Podu approached them, saying they had just arrived, and Yeonho wanted to know how it happened. Chien explained that Il started the fire, and they found a body inside that looked like him, and Shouryong questioned if he had been forced to take his own life. The man handed a will to Shouryong. In it he said he was neither the scapegoat type nor the arsonist type. Yeonho said it was a will with a confession, so it was resolved, but the suspect was dead, and he wasn't sure if they'd get extra points. Shouryong asked if it was really resolved that easily, and Podu said the case was closed and that they wouldn't forget the cooperation, so they would seal the scene. Yeonho asked to return to the lodging, but Ryung refused, saying he had something to discuss with Podu and Ak could go ahead. Yeonho asked if it was about the extra points, and Shouryong agreed. Chien was walking through the city, ready to draw his sword, but he noticed that Shouryong was following him, so he drew his sword, turned, and asked who he was. Shouryong said it was him, and Chien wanted to know what he needed. The young man explained it was about the martial arts techniques the culprit had learned, and the officer wanted to know if it was about the ones he hadn't figured out. Shouryong explained he had discovered it was a technique called Hyowu, used by fighters from the blood cult. The man must have heard the story that demonic arts lead to rapid evolution but eventually cause issues in the body, driving one insane or even to death. Chien asked why he was telling him that, and Shouryong revealed he had learned Aidyu, where the Hyowu art could be safe if learned correctly. Irritated, the officer wanted to know what that meant, but continued, saying it had side effects like red eyes when emotions run high, bodily pain, a weak digestive system, and heightened sensitivity. Chien hadn't shown any emotion because he thought he'd be caught, and Podu said it was always like that. Shuriong said everyone used to say that a few years ago, since suspicion always fell first on the school's warrior. But those who had seen all kinds of things couldn't learn it by mere will. Besides, the learning process was difficult, and a brothel owner or a bastard son wouldn't be able to learn it. He then asked about a weak boy who, despite his appearance, wanted to become a Murim warrior, and Chien said his imagination was vivid, but no one believed it. Rang thought the shoes fit, but they were burned in the fire, and he couldn't change them after leading the scene. No matter what kind of officer he was, if reported, he would lose his position. So Chien's rashness ruined everything, and he asked why he took Hyo's life. Chien lunged forward, telling him to shut up, repeating the question, why did he take Hyo's life? He said the elder was his biological father. Shuriong thought that he was also mentioned in the will. Chien attacked him using his ki, but Ryung warned him not to use that technique as it would shorten his life. The officer didn't care and aimed to send Shuriong to the afterlife. Baek lifted his foot from the ground, jumping while channeling ki into his finger. He struck the vital points on Chien's back. Chien began bleeding from his eyes as he was hit, but Ryung struck his hand, knocking the sword away, throwing Chien to the ground and telling him to calm down first. Lying on the ground, Podu groaned in pain. Shuriong repeated that he should calm down first. Chien opened his eyes wide, starting to cry as he regained consciousness. Shuriong asked where he had learned the technique. The boy said it was when his mother passed away. He mourned at her grave. Since a man in dark clothes gave him a book of martial arts techniques, saying he would gain great power, it was a huge help for a weak body. Thanks to the book, he became a Podu, but not long after, old man Hyo came to speak with him. He said he was his biological father and that he was sorry about his mother's passing. Chien already knew, and even though he knew how Chien was living, his father rejected him, so he decided to take his life, not even caring that he offered him his entire fortune. Shuriong says it was expected he would be at the wedding, and Chien sits down saying he didn't want to reveal this, and the boy should just take his life, because he didn't need money. Shuriong says he understands, and that's great, but he extends his hand, saying he won't report it, leaving Chien confused. Rung explains that he'll turn a blind eye and it'll be their secret, but Podu wants to know why he's doing this out of nowhere. Baek asks for the useless will in exchange for Chien's life, and he asks what that's about. Shuriong says it's under the condition of closing the case and removing the side effects of the Hyulwoo demonic art. Chien replies that he doesn't want to reveal the contents of the will, and if he finds out that man was really his biological father, he would rather die. Shuriong gets angry and asks how someone can be that naive, because he would always find a way. At the Scarlet Flower Palace, the old lady screams that everything was hers, including the old man's inheritance. Since if Phil hadn't taken his life, she would have done it herself, but now she just has to find the will, and if she can't, she'll make one. Then she'll leave it to the inferior sect, and bribing the officials should be enough. At the doorstep, a servant calls for his lady, informing her that the Podu has arrived. The old woman is surprised and asks to let him in. Chien approaches with two men, and the lady asks what honor brings him there. Podu says he found the old man's will, and due to his level of closeness with the victim, he came to inform her together with guard Bak. The old lady says he finally found it, while thinking that the famous Chung Chien found the will and ruined her plans, and asks who the person beside him is, while the young man says he's the heir mentioned in the will. Guard Bak turns, asking about this young man, but the boy introduces himself as Hugh Chien. He brought his father's will with him and asks the old woman to verify it. The woman reads the will and is in disbelief, saying she will never accept this since a man she's never seen before is being called that person's son. They don't even know if this person really exists or not, being the same as in the will. Chung says they confirmed both his authenticity and status, and if the old lady doesn't accept it, they'll assume she's doubting the authority of the government, and the woman tries to deny it. Hugh Chang says it's confusing and shocking, but asks her to listen to his story, since in the past, his mother was a woman who worked for Elder Hyo. Podu looks toward the Silent One while Chang explains that's how his mother passed away, and he moved to another city, but by chance, when he left, his father already knew. The old woman becomes furious hearing the story, but Guard Bak is crying and says the boy seems to have suffered a lot. Chang asks for advice, as he wasn't well versed in business and didn't feel confident managing the businesses his father left, so he needed their experience. The old woman stays quiet along with Guard Bak. The young man reflects that if you corner a rat, it'll attack even a cat, so it's better to bring the two to his side, then asks if they would help him. If he takes care of them, it will be hard for them to refuse, and if that doesn't work, he would go after it another way. But Guard Bak accepts the offer while crying. The old lady still doesn't say anything, but accepts the boy's offer. Chang thinks it's good she was able to assess the situation quickly and says he's very grateful. Outside the building, Chien says Suryong did well. The young man removes his mask, asking what he's talking about, saying he did this for himself. and that the officer was also a good actor. Chien also says he did it for himself and mentions the lady's son is going to jail for tax evasion, assault, and extortion. Suryong says he may want to take her down out of greed, but now things are more complicated, asking about going after him in the middle of the year. Chien asks him to keep the promise of staying out of illegal work, and Baek comments that he's the clean type, like him. Annoyed, the officer says that kind of talk is arrogant, but Suryong asks if his mouth would catch fire just for saying thank you. However, in any case, he wanted to speak informally with Chien since they seemed to be the same age. Chien extended his hand as well, agreeing with Suryong's proposal. The next day, at the Murim Alliance, Joyeol said the biological son was guilty and must receive punishment from the heavens. But thanks to Suryong, everything ended well and he did great. The Rang said he didn't do anything and the culprit turned himself in, but revealed nothing about the demonic art. Joyeol said that judging by the scars on the body, he thought tracking demonic arts would be easy. Rang thought he should hide that old Hyo lost his life because of the Hyo demonic art, and since it was like that, he would have to explain everything he knew. But instead, he just said he understood. Go responded that he shouldn't worry about the entrance exam, since his uncle would write a great letter and make a plaque, and even though he caused some chaos, he would be fine. Suryong thanked him for the opportunity his uncle gave. He kept thinking that with this, the recommendation issue was resolved, so they would head to the Scarlet Palace to finish the rest. Guard Bok said he had arrived and organized the stock for the hotel, bar, and shop that the elder managed, though each had a different guard despite being under the same name. Chang thanked him, saying he worked hard, and Guard Bok got embarrassed. Suryong reflected that he might be a vagabond, but he was adapting quickly, and even old Hyo had him doing dirty jobs as a guard, so he would be useful. He asked if the guard could get him some strong elixirs with yang energy, and it didn't matter if they were poisonous. The guard said that if it was something like that, he'd speak with his black market contacts since he knew some people. Suryong thought that if it involved the black market, then the weapons trade must be growing. He excused himself and asked if the guard could introduce him to a blacksmith who could keep secrets and was skilled, but the guard questioned if he was planning something. The young man said he couldn't give details, but since it would put others' lives at risk, they needed someone very good at keeping secrets, and the guard said he would look into it. Suryong reflected that everything was going smoother than he thought. They decided they would begin the job. The next day, Suryong saw the money problem was resolved and wondered about the demonic arts, doubting the collapse of the blood cult. But he said that nothing in life came easy. Yeonho approached looking sad, asking where his Hyung had been wandering off to alone these past few days. Suryong asked him to let it go or he would end up getting hurt. But Yeonho looked disappointed in the game. He asked if his Hyung was having fun by himself, and Baek said it was nothing, but he was going to sleep a bit. Yeonho told him to sleep as much as he wanted, but he should take a look at something. Suryong asked what it was, and his friend explained that he had taken it from the door where it was hanging. The young man said that job openings for new instructors at the Blue Dragon Academy were now open, and that he should start preparing. But Yeonho told him to read the title. Suryong looked, wanting to know what it said, shouting that there was no way something like that could have happened. He wanted to know what kind of nonsense it was for the students themselves to come back and choose their instructors. The Blue Dragon position required screening, an exam, and 3 months of testing, with monthly grading and votes to select the final instructor. Suryong mentioned the 3 months as a regulatory instructor and asked about the salary, while Yeonho said everything was done in detail, but they forgot that part. The young man analyzed that they were asking them to stand on their toes with kids and teach them. Yeonho said he heard they were only selecting 5 temporary instructors, but there were already over 20 participants and they were likely being watched. Suryong said the paperwork was due in 2 days and the interview would be in 4. The young man had a letter of recommendation, didn't care about paperwork, mastered the 18 outlawed moves without issue, and wanted to bring the heaven-defying technique to stage 2. Yeonho warned that whether it was martial arts or the interview, nothing would change in just a few days, so they needed to look at this from another strategic angle. Suryong asked what was going on with his friend, and Yeonho wanted to know what he thought of him. But since they were already talking about it, in his opinion, Suryong needed a different kind of preparation, and he'd been thinking about that since they met, which left Rang stunned. Yeonho shouted that it wasn't good and they had to prepare, while Baek asked what kind of preparation that would be and where it would happen. Time passed, and the day of the interview for the Blue Dragon Academy instructor arrived. In the past, the Academy's reputation had declined, and many wanted the top spot. A woman said they should get rid of instructors who only talk. The blonde man says that only the skilled will remain, and the Sky Emperor will be different this year. That was the student from the Azure Dragon Academy, Captain Dot Gojin, who would raise the Azure Dragon Academy once again. Someone catches the candidate's attention, announcing that for the new instructor interview, everyone should come in. Gojin wonders if there will be anyone useful among the people, but the girl is surprised to agree with her friend. The captain turns around, asking if there was any incredible master in the crowd. Shuryeon and Yeonho were walking, and Baek asks if those clothes were part of his friend's preparations. Ak comments that it was enough to look like a mayor and that he should trust him. People gossip about the two, saying Shuryeon was amazing. He asks why people are acting like it's such a big deal. Yeonho wants to know why his friend is so boring. Since the students were welcoming them, he should be happy, but Shuryeon found it annoying, wondering if his face was really that special, as he says he had planned to draw attention anyway. But he didn't know how useful that would be, and Yeonho replies that it's the best way to appeal to the students' taste. A thunderous voice shouts that the two of them passed. Dojin tries to stop her, telling her to look this way. Yeonho turns around, asking what that sound was, but the girl calls the two of them over, saying that by the authority of the student council, the two would pass without question. But Dojin interrupts Vice Captain Dang Soso. People wonder what had happened on the rooftop, but Yeonho and Shuryeon simply decide they should keep walking. They were next in the evaluation line. Yeonho bumps into the fat man from the inn. He asks if he's not the same guy from the hotel, but the man gets angry and asks who he's calling fat, since this body is the ultra-powerful face of Kwak Duyong, but he's interrupted by something hitting his face. A shoe lands on the ground next to them. The fat man gets mad and asks which idiot did that, but people keep throwing things, asking why the fat guy was picking a fight with such handsome innocence. Yeonho asks if Shuryeon now understood the reason for dressing so well, since they leave a good impression just by standing still. But a voice yells that enough is enough. From now on, anyone making noise will be penalized. Everyone falls silent before the elder, but he points at the two, saying the same applies to them. If they make noise, they'll be forced to leave. Yeonho complains that he didn't do anything and they were just standing there when the fat guy bothered them. The elder turns to the fat man and says that if he's done with the interview, he should leave immediately, yet he's still causing trouble. But he had to leave, otherwise the elder would kick him out by force. The fat man accepts the order and runs off. Then the elder says he would ask the two of them to leave under his authority. The crowd pleads not to let them leave, because they did nothing wrong and would stay quiet. He turns around hesitantly, seeing Yeonho and Shuryeon with charming faces, so he orders them to stay quiet until their interview, and the boys thank him. He reflects that people could only be pulled to your side with looks, and Yeonho comments that he thought they were going to be kicked out before the test. And again, Rayon realized that being handsome was the best. Yeonho says he hopes he's aware of his looks now, but he didn't expect it to work so quickly. Shuryeon turns and asks who that person was, and the young master explains he's the student leader. That old man was the student leader. Yeonho asks if his Hyung knew him, but Shuryeon explains this was his first time there, and he didn't know anyone. He was sure he didn't know the old man, but he seemed familiar. Then finally, Baek Shuryeon, Ak Yeonho, and Myung Ilo are called, and they step into the room. The elder just follows Shuryeon with his eyes, surprised as he looks more closely at the boy, and thinks he's seen him before, wondering where. As expected, the interviewees were quite flashy. In the middle stood the guardian of 1,000 weapons, on the left was the flaming sword, and on the right was the three-bladed sword. At the center was No Gunsang, the academy director, chosen from hundreds to be an instructor in the blood cult, once called a crazy bastard, but he seemed to have changed. On one side stood the flaming sword, Kwak Chiolwoo. He used martial arts from Yangang, but Shuryeon didn't know him well. Lastly, the three-bladed sword, Namgung-soo, part of the giant clan, and the #1 instructor at the academy, who was Shuryeon's goal. They begin the 16th presentation and ask the three to introduce themselves. Myung Yelho introduces himself, and Yeonho does the same as a candidate for spear instructor. Baek Shuryeon tries to introduce himself by saying that his father had a small academy, but is interrupted by Chiolwoo asking what Yeonho's relationship was with the Spear King. The young man replies that he was his father's cousin. Chiolwoo asks if he met the Spear King recently, and Yeonho explains that it was shortly before he left. Shuryeon wonders if the man wasn't going to hide his ulterior motives regarding the Ak family, but Namgung-soo calls out for Baek Shuryeon. The young man responds, and the instructor asks if he's applying as an external arts instructor. Shuryeon says he's confident in his external arts, but is also competent in martial arts, swordsmanship, memorization, and synchronized techniques. Soo grows suspicious and says it's all just talk, and he doesn't seem to be aware of his internal arts. But Shuryeon replies that it's true his internal arts are weak, but his external techniques are powerful. The instructor says that even with experience, coming from a rural area and thinking he could teach at the academy, wasn't he underestimating the school? Yeonho asks them to wait a moment because even if it were true, the instructor's words were harsh, but Shuryeon questions whether they should check if his words were false or not. Soo gets irritated and slams the table, asking who he thought he was to speak like that. However, Shuriong simply steps forward and says he could defeat the instructor right now using only his external arts, and asks if he wants to test that as well. Yeonho holds him back, apologizing, saying they would leave, and thanks them. The interviewers call for the next group, and Yeonho and Shuriong leave. On their way out, the elder thinks the face looks familiar and wonders if it's the face of a former graduate. But then he notices something different. He grabs some papers, denying what it might be. He reads the document in disbelief. Inside the interview room, Soo yells that he was an arrogant brat and said he would defeat him with external techniques. Cheolwoo tells his friend not to get stressed, saying he was just putting on a show for attention and they should just fail him. But the director says he thought differently, that Suryong entertained him, and he was thinking of passing him, along with the other two, under his authority as director. His vice director gets upset and asks why he was saying such a thing, but Dunseng says they managed to spark his curiosity, because at this age he can generally assess how far someone's talent could go, but he didn't see that clearly with Surinong. Soo comments it's the first time he's seen the director praise someone like that, but No says he just wants to see him one more time, and maybe he's hot-blooded too. He asks if that bothers him, but Soo turns his face, asking why it would bother him, since this was an opportunity the director was personally giving, and he hoped not to be disappointed. No says it would be good, even if only for the growth of the Blue Dragon Academy. On the way, Yeonho asks if his Hyung overdid it, but Suryong asks if he thought they'd really let a new instructor fight a novice. He just made a strong impression. His friend asks what he'd do if he failed, but Ryon jokes that he'd build a giant mansion and call it the White Dragon Academy, but they're interrupted. They both turn to see who was interrupting them. It was Myung Ilho, who says he was impressed by the show during the interview, saying he had met Yeonho before and asking if he remembered. The young man says no and asks when, so Ilho replies it was at the 20th birthday of young lady Yeonhwa. But fate wanted them to meet there anyway, and he asks if they'd like to go out to eat, he would pay. Yeonho says that sounds like a good idea, and Suryong agrees with them. Ilho grabs their attention again, asking if they knew about the practical test that would come next. That night at a bar, they ask if it wasn't supposed to be a secret, since they were all competing for the same spot. Suryong calls the owner over, asking for the best bottle of liquor they had. The elder suddenly asks for a moment alone with Bak Suryong. The young man agrees, leaving his friends speechless. Then, outside, the elder says he only wants to ask one question, wanting to know the name of his father, and Ryong asks why he's asking. But he quickly notices something strange, because he had completely forgotten the warning, where his father said that his grandfather had been a student leader, since he might care for him due to the resemblance with his daughter. The old man asks why he isn't saying anything, but says he'll repeat the question, wanting to know if his last name is Baek, and if he uses the characters Mu and Hyun as his given name. Suryong thinks the old man is an expert. Even at his advanced age, his body is trained and his breathing sharp yet controlled. That old man wouldn't lose even to the flaming sword or the three-bladed sword, so he asks again what the boy's father's name is, wanting to know if it's Baekmhyum. Suryong wonders about that, trying to figure out what his father did to make the old man this angry. But he has no other choice in this situation. The old man says he must be right, so he should attack with the intent to kill, because he's going to lose anyway. Suryong thinks that if he lies, he'll be found out quickly. So first he must survive. He kneels down and calls the man grandfather, greeting him as his grandson Baek Suryong. Then the old man asks who he's calling grandfather, because if he does it again, he'll cut out his tongue. But Ryong says that his mother's surname was Mei, and her name used the characters Yak and Bing, and even if his tongue is cut out, the truth won't change. The old man falls silent at that, while Ryong thinks this is where everything would end. However, the man simply steps closer, then kneels down in front of the boy, grabbing his face and saying he looks like his daughter. His eyes look like hers, along with his hands and even his lips, as he weeps for his grandson. He asks why the boy didn't say anything sooner, but Ryong explains he wanted to have some confidence after entering the academy. Mei says it takes great determination to be his grandson, and the boy smiles, saying he was confident he could do it. His grandfather's expression changes, saying he's upset, because his grandson's smile is just like that bastard father of his, so the boy should never smile in front of him without permission, and Ryong simply reflects that his grandfather was unstable and had trouble controlling his anger. The boy stands up, saying that after meeting his grandfather, he realized he takes after his mother and doesn't need to worry about his father. Mei tells him to behave properly because he's still his father. Round just apologizes, but his grandfather complains that it's true that man was an unmatched bastard, but their business is done, so his grandson can go back inside. Ryong smiles and agrees with his grandfather, saying he'll come greet him more often. Mei just walks away saying he ordered him not to smile, but his grandson did it anyway, while Baek wonders why the old man was being shy. Inside the bar, Yeonho asks if his friend came back in one piece, but Ryeong questions if there was a problem with that. Illo comments that he came back from a personal interview with the Academy's insane sword, Rakshaza, and asks who exactly Baek is. Yeonho asks if Insane Sword is the nickname of the student chief, and Mang begins to explain. Because he's a tactics expert who, after retiring, became an instructor at the Azure Dragon Academy for 30 years, but now he's the Reaper of Delinquents. Yeonho asks if a public indecency incident means students dating, and Ilho agrees since his daughter married a man and ran away. Suryong interrupts them and says to drop that story, because he didn't come here to dwell on the past, though Ak found the story interesting. Baek wanted to know how the practical test would go. Then the boy explains that, as far as he knows, they'll take 2 tests and be evaluated accordingly. First, with a demonstration class where they have to teach in front of several students and instructors. Since the students' vote makes up 50% of that part, it's important to pay attention to their reactions. The second test is a sparring match. They'll have to spar with the instructors and prove their skills, though winning isn't necessary. However, if it happens, a beneficial defeat is also possible. So Ryeong asks if the opponents will be chosen for them. Illo comments that it seems like the boy wants to fight Namgoong-soo, but the director will choose the opponents. Suryeong feels that No Gunsang wants to see him and Soo fight, and on his end, he was placed to show that he's on the same high level as the #1 instructor. Myung says the most important thing is to leave a good impression on the students, so the sparring match isn't the real concern, but Ryeong asks if he has a good method for that. The boy says he thought about that, and before the battle, they should scout the enemy army. Ryeong asks what he means by that, and Illo explains that to understand the hearts of the students, he should go somewhere where there are a lot of them. Fortunately, the student council was hosting a party that night, and it was an opportunity for them to go. At the party, Yeonho seemed impressed. He said there were a lot of people and many from outside, while Illo explained that since it was a festival of the Blue Dragon Academy, it could be considered one for the entire region. Then he pointed out that those were candidates they had seen at the interview and probably had the same thoughts as them. But a girl approached Yeonho, saying they were the new candidates for the teacher position and asked for something, if it wasn't a bother, but someone grabbed her right arm, while another held her left side, saying that impure relations with the opposite sex were against academy rules. She walked away saying she just wanted to say hi to the instructors, but the guards said they'd hear her excuses later and would go to the council first. Ilho said the student council was scary. Yeonho nodded in agreement, but he said there were some students with the same aura that caught his attention, wondering if they were also from the council. Yeonho said they were there to monitor relationships, and Ilho commented it was because of what happened 30 years ago, but Ryeong tried to stop the conversation, saying he had seen enough and they should go back, but Yeonho complained that they hadn't stayed long because he wanted to have a little fun. However, he was grabbed by the collar. A flaming energy threw someone to the other side of the room. The man landed lying down in front of the table. While someone drinking sake approached, Ryeong noticed a strange energy coming from the man, but he asked the injured one to repeat what he had said. However, he was interrupted by Baek, calling him a crazy demon. The crazy demon turned around asking who called him that, and grabbed him by the collar, asking how he dared to say his nickname in front of him. Ryeong just chuckled lightly at him, which made the man angry, while Ryeong explained that he was more fun than the bastards from the student faction. The demon shouted that he was being insulted even though they knew who he was, but he was stopped by 2 people holding his chest. They asked student Hyunwon Kang what kind of behavior that was. Ryeong just wondered if he was from the Hyunwon clan, since he looked just like Hu, and he had said he had no children, but the boy must be a close relative. Kang shouted that he had nothing to say to the twins, and they should get out of his sight. But the students warned that if he got any closer, they would restrain him, causing the sake jar to fall to the floor. Kang asked if the background characters of the student council dared to grab him, then charged forward, telling them to try if they could. Suryeong stayed quiet during the argument, while the twins drew their weapons, saying they would not tolerate disturbances. Kang called them idiots who couldn't speak for themselves and told them to come at him. The twins advanced as the man demanded. Kang blocked the strike and asked if that was all they could do, because it showed the level of this year's council. The other twin, with his staff, prepared for an aerial strike, clashing with Kang's sword. He shouted to his other twin to move now. Then they attacked the crazy demon together, landing a blow to the side of his head, which Kang blocked. Yeonho commented that their coordination was good, and training to know which move to use with just a glance, and Ilho agreed, while Suryeong did not, because what was truly impressive was Hyunwon Kang. Even with a staggering posture from being drunk, he was blocking and dodging nearly fatal blows. All of that with a relaxed smile on his face. Then he tried to slash the twins with his sword, forcing both of them to retreat far away. The crowd wondered why he hadn't been expelled from the academy yet, but Ryeong noticed the disgust and scorn from the people. However, behind that, there was fear of Hyunwon Kang, because he had the talent to make others afraid, defending the twins' attacks with only his sword. Ryeon wondered why the hell he was using such an awkward martial art, and noticed it was strange, wondering if it was the Hyunwon clan's technique. Yeonho said he would explain more later, and Ryeon sensed something deeper. Kang warned the two that it was boring and he could see all their movements slowly, so they should end this fight right now. But someone opened the door behind them. Kang turned around, but was surrounded by a rope. Several members of the student council surrounded him, and Kang asked if they wanted to come at him with more people. Yeonho asked if they should step in now, while Illo said no, because it would ruin their practical exam. The man walks through the door, telling the Dan bastard from the Hyunwon clan to behave properly. Enraged, Kang calls out to Pang Sahyok. He says the man must be sober and should go back to the dorm and sleep, but Kang tells him to get lost because it's none of his business. The two argue as Pang threatens to disgrace the last bit of the Hyunwon family's honor. Shuryeon asks about Sahyok, but Yeonho questions how he doesn't even know him, since he's the president of the Blue Dragon Academy's Club Alliance and one of the Academy's major powers alongside President Gojin. The Habuk Pang family is among the 5 great clans and rivals the Hyunwon clan out of pride in their martial arts lineage. Kang decides to leave, calling the man a bastard, and Sahyok comments that it's a good decision to protect the family from rats. Yeonho adds that there's a long history between the two families, and Ryeon realizes there's a lot to catch up on once they get back, since Kang didn't even flinch in front of Pang. The troublemaker from the Hyunwon family orders the guards to get out of his way, still angry. Yeonho says he was crying earlier and just wanted to stay and have fun, while Ryeon says they should just leave. But Pang approaches the trio saying he noticed them earlier. He says they stood out because of their striking appearance and introduces himself as the president of the Club Alliance. Suryeon introduces himself along with Yeonho and Ilho. Then Pang apologizes again, saying that Fool showed a bad side of the academy, but Ryeon says it's normal. It happens at festivals. The president thanks him for being understanding and open-minded, and the group begins to walk away. Pang stops the instructor, saying he can't ignore how uncomfortable the situation was, asking if he can offer them dinner tonight as an apology. That evening, he says he's paying today and they can eat as much as they want. Yeonho comments that there are a lot of guests besides them, and Ryeon says they're all trying to get noticed, since there were students present but also instructor candidates who had done the interview. Pang announces he'd like to say something to the instructors who were shining so brightly in that place. He steps up on a stage and begins by saying he would first like to congratulate everyone for passing the interview, leaving the instructors stunned in the room. They mentioned that the results of the interview were only going to be released tomorrow, but somehow he already knew them. Ryeon reflects that the reason for the invitation was to show off his ability to gather people, but now he was going to punish that bastard a little. Pang says he hopes everyone gets good results in the practical training afterward, while the examiners ask the master to take care of them mentally and physically. Yeonho gets irritated and says he's a joke as a successor of the 5 great clans, but his friend tells him not to get mad and just order a drink with snack, since he's going to the bathroom for a moment. He heads outside just as someone rushes in. Ryeon says he finally found him, asking if he could bring someone to him, while the staff member apologizes, saying he's busy. The boy steps closer and reads the name on his neck, scaring the staff member, who runs off saying he'll bring them immediately. Illo asks why his hyung is outside if he said he was going to the bathroom, because there's a commotion on the upper floor. Ryeon asks about the fight, and the boy explains that Pang Sahyok won't stop insulting Yeonho, and the rumors aren't good, since their instructor's only in name, and it seems like he wants to control everything as a successor of the 5 great clans. Ryeon says he won't let it slide, because he can't tolerate that kind of student who might learn from him in the future, when suddenly a scream comes from the building. Ryeon runs with Illo, asking what that was, until they come face to face with the unfolding scene. Pang says that no matter how drunk Ak is, if he acts like this, there will be consequences, telling him not to make a mockery of a student, because he won't become an instructor at the Blue Dragon Academy if he behaves like that. Yeonho picks up a piece of cloth and says he's the one who tore it. Pang laughs at him and says it's arrogant to say that while holding the evidence in his hand, but Suryeon appears and asks why he isn't behaving appropriately. Sahyok says since he wasn't returning, he thought Suryeon ran away like a rat, but before he finishes the sentence, he gets slapped. He flies backward from the blow, cursing Suryeon for hitting him. Baek asks if that kind of insult is something he thinks he can say to his teacher. Suryeon asks if that was something he could say to his teacher, but it only enrages Pang more, who says the boy doesn't understand the situation while a servant helps his young master. Sayo grabs the servant by the neck, saying it's perfect, because he committed harassment against students and violence against them, along with property damage, throwing his servant to the ground. He picks up a discarded cup. pressing it against Suryong's chest and saying he even committed theft. He asks how many other crimes he had committed, but Suryong simply yawns in his face, saying he was late. Pang asks what that was supposed to mean, but Chien appears along with several other officers. Annoyed, the young master demands to know what was going on. Podu says they received reports of underage drinking at the location, so Pang repeats the claim. Chien asks for everyone's identification, but the young master says this was a martial arts matter and not something the government should interfere with. The officer repeats the statement and asks if there was public use of demonic arts there. Pang repeats the question again, but Podu asks if he thought they would back off just because he used the words murim or martial arts. Frustrated, the young master demands to know who made the report. Chien tries to conceal it, but Suryong reveals it was him, leaving Pang furious as he turns around, asking if he had no pride as a martial artist. Chien tells the boy to come with him and submit to investigation, while Sahyok tries to cover up the incident, saying it was just a small accident, and that if Podu let it go, he would be repaid with immense kindness in the future. But Chien simply replies that in addition to obstructing justice, he was now attempting a bribe. The boy tries to use his connection to the Habuk family, but the officer doesn't care and tells him to present his ID at the station. Pang tries to twist the situation, saying Suryong committed heinous acts against female students while drunk, and also attacked students who tried to stop him. And while Sahyuk attempted to break up the fight, a table was broken and chaos followed. He asks if the people around them saw it too, and the crowd agrees with the young master. Then he tells Podu that he didn't do anything. Yeonho shouts that it's a lie and that the one who did all of it was Pang Sahyok, since he set a trap and dragged everyone there. Swearing on the name of his clan, Sandong-ak, Pang shouts that he's crazy for staking his family name on something like this, and Yeonho asks if he doesn't have the confidence to stand by his own word. Young Master Sahyuk calls him an idiot, saying his words carry more weight than those of Ak, and asks if he didn't know what the Hyunwon family has endured. Yeonho asks what he's supposed to do in a situation like this and why he's speaking informally when they're not even friends. The two argue with each other while Suryong thinks that martial artists are all the same. Mei interrupts, saying he asked his students to have a meal together. He asks what was going on there. Suryong greets him by calling him grandfather, catching the attention of both Pang and Yeonho. Even the crowd of students shouts that it's the student director and Suryong called him grandfather. The young man says that young Master Pang invited him for dinner, but he just remembered his grandfather while eating. Irritated, Mei asks what happened, and Pang tries to speak without stammering. So the old man wants to know what was going on with Podu in that situation. Chien agrees and says he will explain. Mei says he drank alcohol, damaged property, and tried to bribe Mr. Podu, and Pang tries to speak. However, the elder says the female students had torn dresses and the men had split lips, and after the fight broke out, he tried to hide it behind his family name. Annoyed, he asks how someone like that dares to use the academy's name. Pang tries to turn the situation around. Suryong reflects that the students couldn't even react to the student director. Mei calls Podu and says his students acted shamefully. Then he apologizes and takes responsibility for not teaching them properly. Chien looks back, and Suryong whispers to just give him a warning. Podu replies that if he says it like that, he'll feel embarrassed for pressing the matter, and decides to leave, hoping for a good conversation with Mei, and the old man thanks him. Suryong asks if there shouldn't be compensation for the damage caused to the place. Chien agrees that the hotel owner will receive compensation for it. Mei says the damage caused to the venue will be covered by the academy, but Pang interrupts, asking to pay for the damages himself, thinking it would be abandonment if they found out. Suryong reflects that if he's part of an important family, then that's exactly how he should behave. Then Chien says he's leaving now that the situation is resolved, with Mei also saying she's leaving since it's no longer a dinner. Pang waves goodbye to the student leaders, shouting, but the old man says everyone is coming with him, and they better not even think about running, because when they return, he'll have a word with each of them. Then he says he'll speak to his grandson later. Suryong bids farewell to his grandfather as the old man grumbles about the academy's discipline. The people left at the party start thinking about heading out soon, but Suryong asks if he can say something before they leave. The instructors tell him to speak freely and apologize for not recognizing him earlier. Suryong sighs and grits his teeth, saying everyone should be ashamed because after all that, they're not qualified to become teachers. He turns to leave the place while they all remain silent. He calls his friends to go, and Yeonho agrees with his Hyungnim. Inside a room, guard Bok asks about 10 times, and Chang tells him to demand 10 times the damage cost. Bok says the one who's supposed to pay is the heir of the Pang clan, and if they ask for more, it might cause trouble. But Chang tells him to write that if they don't pay 10 times, then send the bill to the student council president instead of to him, thinking that Sahyok will go hungry in the dorms. He rides off toward a different place. Yeno asks if he's going to be away for a while, and Illo says the practical test is in 10 days. But Suryong says he won't be long, while Myung asks if there was any problem. The boy thinks that actually, it's something that will benefit him and help him prepare for the practical test as he arrives at a massive forest. Bok explains that this is the vagabond market, where vagabonds were once bought and sold for their strength and skills, but now it's a black market. He thinks the place is full of dangerous people, but says his young master will be safe with him, while Chang reflects that his guard is terrifying. Suryong asks where the elixir shop and the blacksmith he requested are, and Bok decides to take him to the elixir first. A man without an arm shows a yang ginseng and asks if he wants to smell it to boost his energy, but Bok refuses and Chang reflects that it's good quality. Since it's a great find and will help a lot, Bok asks if it's acceptable and Suryong agrees, telling him to head to the blacksmith now. He calls guard Bok and asks what kind of person the blacksmith is. The guard explains that no one knows his real name and just calls him Old Man Y, but he's as big as a bear and incredibly stubborn. Chang hopes his skills are as strong as his stubbornness, and Bok tells him not to worry about that. Because if the rumors are true, Old Man Wee appeared and many vagabonds survived thanks to his sword, never throwing it away with infinite usage. Suryong says that if that's true, his swords must be on the level of named swords, and Bok replies that the old man just treats them like junk. The boy thinks the story is well crafted and says that other vagabonds lined up to buy his weapons, but Bok says Old Man Wei made a request to the vagabonds. It's said that he arrogantly claimed if they completed his request, he'd forge a named sword, something incredible. Suryong asks what the request was, but the guard doesn't know, because everyone who accepted it lost their lives without exception. Chang asks if he's just saying that to scare him out of accepting the request, but the guard continues, saying no, because even if he doesn't accept it, he should have enough money for a good weapon. Either way, the man is stubborn, skilled, and knows how to keep quiet. A blacksmith who has everything his young master needs. Chang says they'll find out soon enough, but someone is suddenly thrown toward them, hitting their head on a rock. Bok asks what that was. The person on the ground screams, cursing Old Man Wei and asking why he refused even though he offered more money. The old man tells him to get lost because he wouldn't sell anything to someone like him. Then the man asks if the old guy thinks he'll just leave things like this. At that moment, the old man appears behind the curtain, asking if the guy wants a beating before he leaves. The man runs away in fear of the old man, while Chang asks if that was the blacksmith and Bok confirms it. Suryong comments that his guard didn't mention the guy's martial arts were strong too, but the guard didn't know about that. The old man asks who the two people standing at his door are. Bok introduces himself to Master Wei and says he came on horseback to see him, while Suryong recognizes his face. Wei orders them to stop chatting and say what they came for. The guard says he came to request a weapon, making the old man repeat that, and asking if the sword was for the young master there, to which Suryong agrees, noticing the dragon tattoo on his shoulder. He asks if he would craft a celestial weapon if he completed his request. Bok yells that it was just a rumor, but Chang tells him to wait. Wei talks about the story and how everyone who accepted the request lost their lives, and Suryong completes it by saying they went insane, which excites the old man. The young man says he would fulfill the request but asks if it could take a bit longer since he has some commitments, and doing it immediately would be a little difficult. Wei begins to laugh loudly at the boy, telling him to look at him and straighten his posture, while Suryong wonders if he was about to be judged like a master would. The old man repeats that he's curious, so the boy wants to know what he looks like. Wei calls him an unrefined sword, but if he reaches his peak, he would be unimaginable. But at the moment, he could break at any time, so he could leave. Suryong thinks the old man is sharp and figured out the condition of his body, so he says he'll come back another time. However, the old man extends his hand with a sword, telling the boy to take Lunar Shadow, because he would put it to good use. Chang reflects that the sword's energy was unusual, and the sheath wasn't anything special, but it was definitely a named sword, so he thanks him before someone calls for attention. It was the man from earlier with his companions, ordering them to set fire and take everything from the tent, not letting the old man escape. Suryong reflects that just by looking at him, he could tell the man was on drugs, and that's why Weiss sent him away. Then the henchmen say the boys look scared. Bok draws his sword, asking how he dares act like that in the vagabond market, but Chang tells him to wait, asking both Old Man Wei and his guard to stay put, while drawing his own sword. The bandits ask who the hell this lunatic is, because he doesn't seem right in the head, but Chang calls them trash who ruin the lives of others and says he'll clean them all up. The men mock Suryong for stepping forward alone, but are quickly slashed by his sword. Some charge at the boy, telling him to lose his life. But Suryong dodges, thinking they're out of sync and their surprise attack was weak. He sweeps both of them off their feet, then slashes them with his new sword. He tells them to fight properly if they wanted to face him. But one man interrupts, trying to attack him with an apple. Suryong reflects that if it's going to be like that, He'll see how sharp the sword really is, cutting vertically. Over the fallen man's body, he jokes that it was stronger than he thought and sliced right through it. The men run away screaming that the boy was a monster and they should have gone to the bar instead. Then their boss tries to speak as well, but Suryong simply asks if he should end all their lives, but says no, it'd be too much trouble. He charges at all of them before explaining the catch, because even if they all ran, they'd be hit by his sword right in the abdomen. He says they can't leave after what they did. Finally, he pulls his sword out of the last body. Wei takes back what he said earlier and asks if he can hear his request now. So Suryong simply agrees with the old man. Inside his home with his tools, the old man says that before talking business, the request was about taking someone's life, and Chang asks who the target is. Wei explains he can't say at the moment, but he's trying to find someone who can defeat that person now. So if he succeeds, Wei will give everything he's got to forge the desired weapon. Chang tells guard Bok to leave them alone for a moment, and Bok tries to argue. But Suryong asks just for a moment, as he feels this might become personal. Bok stands up, agreeing with his master, leaving the tent while looking back. Ryong says he has something to ask the elder Wei, and the old man tells him to go ahead. He asks why he came to this place, and Wei looks confused. But the boy wants to know why the leader of one of the 8 blood cult clans, the Wiji clan, is in a place like this. Wei immediately lunges to silence Cheng, trying to punch the man in the face. Wei lifts his foot off the ground swiftly, aiming to strike Cheng in the face. The boy dodged all of the elder's strikes, but was hit in the end. He comments that he managed to land a hit based on what he saw from the martial arts. But Wei just wants to know who he is. Cheng starts to take off his mask and tells the old man to calm down, because he's someone in a similar situation to his. Wei asks if he's also a survivor, but Suryong says he's a descendant. If the old man doesn't believe him, he'll show him something else, drawing his sword, charging forward with a thrust, which releases an incredible demonic energy. Wei says it's the first time in a long while he's seen the bloody swordsmanship, and asks what his connection to the cult is. Suryong explains that the old man understands now, and that he learned that technique from his father, a student of the Blood Wolf group. The elder says he doesn't know his father, but he can tell he raised his son well. Still, he wants to know how the boy figured out his identity, so Bake tells him about the tattoos, specifically the one on the left shoulder with the red dragon, hiding the cult's divine item, the Blood Demon Sword, where Wei had inscribed his wish. He asks if the request has anything to do with the blood cult, but Wei lowers his head and says he can't deny it, because he was asking the boy to take the life of his own grandson. Suryong is shocked by the strange request, saying that this wasn't a normal situation, so he came alone, and asks how many days it would take to get there, since it might be tight if he wants to return for the practical exam. But Wei says they've arrived, while Suryong asks whose grave that is. The elder says it's the grave of his son and wife, and the child over there is his grandson, Wiji Qian. He had been the least talented person ever born in the history of the Wiji clan, so Suryong asks why he would want to take the life of that child, but the elder cries as he says it was all his fault. His grandson looks over and sees the two of them. Wei continues explaining that after losing his son and wife, his thirst for revenge led him to raise the child with an iron fist. Qian hides behind the tree and asks if that really is his grandfather. He jumps toward his grandfather, and Wei asks him to calm down or he'll trip. The boy gets excited by the visit and says he was bored, while the elder says it's been a while. He looks back and sees butterflies, as Qian chases after them like a normal child. Wei explains that a few years ago, he left his grandson alone for months, and during that time, a man in a black hat came and gave him a book. Suryong thinks it's the same thing that happened to Podu. Then Wei says he thought the sword technique written in it was an incredible martial art, but realized the truth too late, now that Qian is trapped in his own mind. Suryong asks what martial art he's talking about, but Qian says he'll show him, turning around. Wei shouts for the boy to run while Qian draws his sword, causing a massive explosion at the point of impact, which forces both men to retreat. Suryong thinks that technique is the Eternal Sword, wondering how that child has the Eternal Sword of the Sword Master. But Qian calls his grandfather with a dark expression, asking if he can take the life of the guest since he's really bored. He tells his Hun not to lose too fast, while Wei tries to stop the boy. Suryong reflects that after the Hyuwu arts, now there's the Eternal Sword, so he tells the elder to stand back until this is resolved. Wei agrees with the boy and says he'll leave it to him, so Suryong draws his own sword, asking if Qian is ready to begin. The little boy smiles and asks if he's serious, because he's excited that someone will play with him. He tries to slash at Suryong, but his opponent dodges the strike and asks how he should play with him. Qian is impressed as he turns, but Suryong tells him not to be surprised and to try attacking again. He wants to see how much the boy has trained on his own. Qian charges again, shouting for Suryong not to die too quickly, because it wouldn't be fun that way. But the boy avoids the sword strike once more, making the child suddenly glance to the side. He tries another slash, but Suryong ducks to evade it, dodging yet another of Qian's strikes. Finally, he blocks using his own sword. Qian asks how'd he dodge that. It was amazing. But Suryong reflects that the boy is better than he thought, and if this drags on too long, he'll be at a disadvantage, so it's good he took a dose of trefoil before coming. Then he says this won't do, while Qian asks about. Ryeon charges with his sword, saying the game would end now. He clashes with Qian's sword. The boy is thrown back by the impact. Then he looks forward, trying to guess the next move. But Suryong charges at him again, and Qian realizes that was his technique. Buck strikes downward, saying that martial art was always his, landing the sword on the boy's leg. He remembers someone telling him to improve his balance and stop using the sword arrogantly, since he still had a long way to go. Qian tries to slash at Suryong carelessly, yelling for him to go to the afterlife, but the strike is dodged. Suryong simply swings his sword to the side, striking Qian's arm, and sending him flying from the impact. Suryong explains that it's not over yet and that fencing is the martial art of the outsiders, so elbows stay close to the body, while relaxing the shoulder and using the fists. Qian starts laughing maniacally, saying his hung wasn't fun, and Suryong reflects that he didn't think the fat guy would find the technique to bring down the blood cult like that, telling him to calm down. Qian tries to slash again, screaming that he hated him, but Ryeong simply defends and asks if he still didn't get it, because now he would show him, using the eternal sword in mysterious movement, clashing again with Qian's strike, activating the true move called Eternal Singularity. Qian stumbles back from the hit, forcing his feet down not to fall. Suryong says that's why it's important to have a good teacher. Before Qian faints and collapses unconscious to the ground in front of him. At dusk back home, Suryong says the kid was an idiot, because he had good knowledge of herbs, otherwise both of them would have died, since he really suffered a Kai deviation from using that technique. He reads the book and realizes how easy it is to have Ki thrown off by something like that and wonders if the guy in the hat gave it to him with that intention. Since judging by his talent alone, he was on the same level as Hanwon Kang, and it was obvious that after the guy in the black hat gave him the book, he just stood back and watched. Suryong places a hand on his head and says that even if he's not that great, he still managed to learn everything without a teacher. So if the damage is only this much, he can save him. The boy's energy begins to circulate, and he wakes up screaming. Suryong thinks that if he couldn't handle it, he'd lose his life, but until the impure energy is absorbed, he must endure. Qian bleeds from his eyes during the treatment. Lake also screams to ease the pain he felt, but Qian's veins, which were bulging as he clutched the sheets, disappear and his arm returns to normal. Suryong reflects that it worked, and now it's his turn, meditating to get rid of the impure Ki. But he notices something strange in his Dan, letting out a loud scream that Wei hears from outside, because after combining the energy he absorbed with his body's impurities, the impure energy inside him was released. He could now advance to the third stage of the heaven-defined divine technique just from that, and had never experienced anything like it before. But Wei bursts in suddenly, asking what happened. Suryong greets the elder, who rushes to his grandson to check if he's alright. The boy explains that there was no need to take his grandson's life, because he removed the impure energy from his body and mind, so the boy should wake up soon. Wei embraces his grandson, asking how he could ever repay such a favor. But Qian suddenly regains consciousness. The grandfather asks if he's awake, and the boy says he had a nightmare. Wei starts crying, agreeing, because it had all just been a long nightmare. He kneels before Suryong and says he'll do anything he asks, even if it's his life. Suryong refuses, saying that a single sword would be more than enough. Wei shouts that if that's the case, he'll use all his skill to forge a perfect named sword. But Suryong shows the ore, saying one sword isn't enough, because even if it's small, it has to be at least on the level of a demonic blood sword, making Wei scream in shock that it's starfall. Suryong asks if he can make something even better than a demonic blood sword. At the academy, Yunho complains that it's already the day of the practical test, but his hung hasn't arrived. Mei appears behind him and repeats the same question. But the heir of the Act family replies that he'll be there soon. The old man turns away, saying they'll see, while Yunho just wants to know when his hung will arrive. He waits for Illova to come down from the stage and tells him he did well in his class, while the boy complains that the demonstration class was harder, because it felt like the students who attended were pretty mean. He asks if his Baekhyung hasn't arrived yet, and Yeonho explains that he hasn't received any news from him. The boy says it felt like an ambush, and that it was almost time for Suryong's class. The director already asked about him 3 times, showing up again behind him. Mei comments that he still hasn't arrived and really is the son of that man. Therefore, he would have to fail candidate Bak Suryong, but Yeonho tells him to wait a minute, because he's saying that with the future of the Azure Dragon Academy in mind, but if he fails Suryong, He'll just open an academy right across the street to steal students. Mei thinks that this confidence and scheming reminds him of his daughter. So he decides enough time has passed, and if he's not there when called, he'll fail. But Illo asks him to push his position to the end of the line. Then Nangong-su appears, saying he's going to take a break and asks if there's a problem here. The student director says Baek Suryong hasn't arrived yet, while Su comments that he's not the type to be scared or nervous about a demonstration class. But if that's the case, it must mean something urgent happened, so he suggests pushing Baek Suryong to the last position in line. Mei shouts that it's unfair, but the instructor says it's only unfair if the last candidate doesn't give permission. The boy shouts that he accepts the condition, because he's willing to accept that. Su apologizes to the vice director for acting without authorization, but he replies that it's fine because the director wouldn't mind. Then the number 1 instructor turns to leave, saying he's been waiting for this personally and hopes the boy shows up. Yamano reflects that it was his plan all along since they're stricter with the last candidate. But the student director gets angry and says that if his grandson doesn't show up in time, he'll take his own life. At the exam entrance, the fat man explains that this is what he learned during his stay at the Vermilion Bird Academy. No Gunsang comments that he's good at teaching, and Su agrees because he knows more than he expected. The vice director says he's the son of his cousin and tells everyone to stop with the compliments, but Su is serious. He has potential. They say he's a good person when he's not drunk, and that's only a problem when he drinks, but Su wants to know if there's a reason he won't stop drinking. The Flaming Sword says he's a survivor of the mass defeat at Mount Chinanju, but they should focus on the outcome, so Su prepares to call the next candidate. Yeonho steps up and says he'll demonstrate his spear technique, so he shifts his footwork and charges forward with the spear. The impact strikes the ground with a burst of purple energy. Then the vice director says it's what's expected from a named son, while Su comments that he's very skilled. Next they call the following candidate, Baek Suryong. Su reflects that to think he dared to provoke him, calling him a country bumpkin. The vice director announces that the final demonstration will be a class on the fundamentals of external martial arts and will begin shortly, so all students should take a seat. He asks candidate Baek Suryong to step onto the platform, but there's no response, even as So Wang and Pang wait for him. The students comment that they're not the kind to need a lesson on the basics, so the vice director calls the candidate again, falling silent in the arena. He comments that in the end, he didn't show up, and Su thinks maybe that's all he was capable of. However, the director tells him to wait, because someone is flying in, wondering if it's a cannonball because he's coming in fast. The crowd moves aside as the energy cannon lands. Su wonders what that was, while Mei says that Punk finally arrived, and his friends call out to Suryong. The boy lands with skill, leaving So dazzled and Pang and Wang annoyed. Then he plants his foot on the ground, apologizing for the delay, and introduces himself as Baek Suryong. Su and the vice director stay quiet while Gunsang laughs, saying this is fun. He says he's never had this much fun as a director and asks if the boy can begin his presentation immediately. Suryong agrees and says he can, then looks to the side analyzing, because there were some familiar faces there. He says that, as with any lesson on external arts, he'll focus on practical skills. Since it was his first class, he says he'll put a reward on the line to lift the mood, offering 100 Nang to anyone who can throw him out using only external techniques, because he will also only use external arts, and if he's forced to use internal arts, he'll lose as well, but the time limit is 30 minutes, so they'd better be quick. Wang quickly grins, shouting that the 100 Nang were his as he charges at Suryong. The young man grabs Wang's hand, throwing him forcefully to the ground. Wang hits his head and complains. Suryong laughs, saying he knew Hyun-won would be first, but then turns and says there's not much time, so they'll start right away. Several disciples are thrown across the arena, while others are tossed out. Suryong complains that it's getting boring and asks if no one else will challenge him. Pang charges, yelling not to underestimate his clan. However, Baek simply dodges, saying his movements were obvious, landing a strike on his thigh. So throws knives toward the instructor, telling him to look at her too, but the young man just deflects them with lunar shadow. The girl tries to grab a lock of his hair, asking for a strand, but Suryong dodges, asking why she wanted it. She says it was just to celebrate, but she gets thrown away. He reflects that this felt like a psychological game, and he's sure she's the daughter of the Sikwon Dang clan. Someone steps behind him, trying to attack Suryong stealthily, but he dodges, saying the surprise attack was nice, but the movements were obvious, landing a hit straight to the attacker's groin. Suryong apologizes, saying he didn't mean to burst it. Looking at the students, he says they still have spirit, so wouldn't it be better if they all attack together? Wang refuses, saying he fights alone, and Pang disagrees, saying Wang needs to reach his level first. Suryong says they'll just be defeated again like this, but So disagrees. The young man says they might not like it, but at their current level, there's no way they can win alone. He thinks this is just like cult training. He says he'll do this. From now on, he won't use his left hand, and if it gets too easy, he won't use his foot either. Wang asks about that, and Pain curses him, while Soso seems even more in love. But the three charge forward while Sayeok orders them to push him out. Suryeong reflects that they'll need to strike simultaneously to have a chance, but they must give it their all and work together. He moves his sword with speed, blocking the trio's attack. Wang and Pang are thrown one after the other, joking with each other about one landing on top of the other. Suryeong laughs and tells them to keep trying. However, an instructor stands up, saying he's been quiet since the beginning, but this wasn't an external arts class. Suryeong asks who he is, since just by looking he could tell he was an instructor. But Yang Arak says he could never succeed with a slim, slender body. He should have a body like his to practice external arts. Therefore, he's going to put an end to this joke the boy calls a class. Gunsang asks if it's really necessary to have a body like Instructor Yang's to practice external arts, but the director explains that external arts aren't just about building muscles, since it seems candidate Baek Suryeong has reached a considerable level in them. He asks if Instructor Yang doesn't think so. Irak agrees that he's better than average, but mentally wonders if Instructor Namgon will keep staying silent, because if this continues, he'll lose his position as external arts instructor. Sue asks what he should do, but Irak wants to know what that means. Namgon tells him not to worry about things beyond his level, as it seems like he just wants everyone to see him yelling, so he should care about simpler matters. Irak wonders what he's supposed to do, because if someone like Suryeong becomes an external arts instructor, his own position will be at risk. He blocks the student's strike with his sword, while Soso tries to slash him and he dodges. Pain tries a kick but misses. Irak mentally calls for Sojuhan, and the boy responds. Then the instructor orders him to use internal arts, saying he'll take responsibility for it, but the student hesitates. The master threatens him. If he doesn't do what he's told, he'll tell the student director that he went to a brothel. Juman draws his sword, thinking his teacher must have sent him there for this, while Suryeong defends attacks from Pain and Wang. Irak tells Juhan to move in now, trying to strike Suryeong from behind with his sword. The three evaluators are shocked by the boy's action, while Yeonho shouts for his team to dodge, and Illo asks what the hell is going on. Pain looks back as the strike approaches, thinking that lunatic bastard was using internal arts, ordering Hwon Kang to dodge the sword attack. Kang questions what he thought he was doing as the strike nears Suryeong. Baek draws the moon shadow, effortlessly defending against the internal art strike. The crowd wonders how he cut through a blade surrounded by wind using only a sword, repeating the incredible feat of the external arts instructor. Irak thinks he's fallen into a trap, claiming that Suryeong used internal arts, even though he was supposed to teach external arts and should be disqualified. Gunsang denies it, since the new instructor hadn't used them, because someone with absolutely no internal arts. In other words, it was all the skill of someone who had become one with the sword. He asks what Professor Namgong thinks, and Sue agrees, saying it was incredible external technique. Suryeong bows to the judges and says his demonstration ends there, while his friends celebrate him being the best. Ilvo admits he was nervous before he arrived, wanting to know where Suryeong had been, and the boy replies he was helping an acquaintance and things got complicated, but he had no idea how much physical training he had done. Mian is happy he made it back in time, even if just barely, and Yeonho complains about having asked the student director to give him more time. Suryeong agrees with both and says today was on him, so the two could drink as much as they wanted, prompting Ilho to complain that he should have said so earlier, since they were going to eat a lot. They raise a toast and shout cheers. The young master of the Ming family asks if his friends knew there would be a life-risking fight demonstration tomorrow, but Suryeong agrees, saying it would be good if he faced Namgong Soo, while Yeonho asks if he could win against him. Baek thinks that if it were related to external arts, he wouldn't lose, but says it's just a demonstration and they shouldn't worry, so Yeonho and Illo agree with their Kun. Then Mi appears behind his grandson, saying his love for alcohol reminded him of his father. The boy turns and asks when his grandfather arrived, and what brought him there, while Yeonho and Ilho hide under the table. Mi asks if he got hurt anywhere, since that earlier provocation was too much for his body, but Suryeong refuses help. The old man hands a pill to his grandson, who asks what it is, noting its rare scent. Mi walks away, saying his mother had a weak body and he didn't seem healthy either, while Suryeong disagrees with his grandfather. Gonsang shows up and comments that he didn't know the boy was his grandson, but Baek is surprised since he hadn't even noticed the director. Yeonho and Illo whisper under the table about the turn of events, since Guanyin no Gyusang of the Thousand Weapons, who had defeated many specialists, now seemed different from the past, apologizing for eavesdropping and arriving at the wrong time. But he wanted to know if Suryeong had time to talk with him, leading the boy to a room with tea. Gyusang says that even at his age, he still doesn't know his favorite teas well. Suryeong asks if he should order alcohol, but the director just wants to know who taught him martial arts. Bak stammers, saying he learned from his father, as he had been a problematic student at the Azure Dragon Academy in the past. Yusang asks if there's any reason he hadn't gone to Gangho yet. Shuryeong explains that he has a weak body and thought getting into fights was pointless since he liked to teach. The director summarizes that he avoids conflict and doesn't want to be tied to Gangho's bloodshed, and the boy agrees. Yusang says he doesn't seem like someone who avoids blood, but rather someone who's spilled so much he's grown bored of it. Shuryeong is surprised by that, but the director says he's done with questions and wants to know if the boy has anything to say. Shuryeong asks to face Namgong-soo in tomorrow's fight demonstration. The director refuses, since Professor Namgong is a pillar of the academy, invited by many, and can't fight just anyone. Shuryeong explains that he's been preparing for the #1 instructor at Jade Academy to change, while Gonsang summarizes that he wants to defeat Soo. But he is premature and the fight can't be allowed yet. Shuryeong concludes that the director believes he will lose. Gonsang simply closes his eyes, asking, "Who knows?" imagining a complex duel between the two. He says it would be fun, while Shuryeong notes that he simply closed his eyes, asking who would win in a fight, but the director refuses to answer, since either way, Baek's opponent has already been decided and can't be changed anymore. Shuryeong complains that now there's nothing he can do. The director asks if he wants to become a star instructor, and the young man agrees, since that was his reason for coming to the academy. Gonsang wants to know what he thinks a star instructor is. Shuryeong explains it's someone good at teaching martial arts who has earned respect throughout the organization, but the director says that's not how it is. His maternal grandfather was extremely skilled, and the vice director captivated the Murim with his swordsmanship, but even that wasn't enough to be a star instructor. Shuryeong asks if it's because he's young and good-looking, since he's confident in that too. The director turns away, denying it, saying that's not what he meant, while Shuryeong asks if there's another way to become one. Gonsang replies that if there were, he himself would be a star instructor too, but Baek takes that as an insult. However, the director stands up and tells him not to be impatient or in a rush. Looking at the young man, he remembers when he first met Professor Namgong, since the two are similar. But the director also doesn't like the current Professor Soo. Shuryeong is surprised by that statement, but Gonsang explains that he's doing everything he can for the academy. Yet he believes Baek might take a different path from Namgong Soo. The young man stands up, wanting to know why the director is telling him this, but the director says he doesn't know, just to take it as a well-intentioned scolding. Shuryeong leaves the bar drunk, asking to be excused. He reflects on what it means to be a good teacher, since in the past he was one of the best instructors, but they called him a devil instead of a teacher. His students never called him master either, those 4 kids raised by him as weapons, and he says he could only rest after taking enough of a beating himself. Those 4 learned martial arts from him and had their personalities crushed from a young age, taught only to obey. A blue-haired boy tells the instructor he can't feel his arm, but Shuryeong kicks him again, since he never treated them gently and was even stricter with them than with others. The instructor says that if he can still feel pain, then he's fine, and if he complains again, he'll break his arm. A blonde boy asks if they can't just give up, but Shuryeong tells them they'll be discarded once they're no longer useful, since there are plenty of others like them. Another dark-haired boy asks if their teacher wanted that, leaving Shuryeong silent and thoughtful, but he denies it, saying that would tarnish his reputation. He tells the boys to get back to training, while they scream in anger. Shuryeong admires their gaze, thinking they seemed useful. Then he walks drunkenly through the city, repeating to himself about being a good teacher, because he remembers that he once thought Namgong Soo was perfect the first time he saw him, but he was just like his past self. Then, looking up at the sky, the young man admits he has no idea, because beyond what he did in the cult, he never thought of a different way. The next day, they decide to stop the fight of candidate Akiono, who's feeling sick. The young man yells that he'll leave it to his friends, running off to vomit, while Shuryeong comments that he was a peak-level expert, but weak to alcohol. Even so, he seems to have drawn even more attention during the fight because of that. At least he managed to finish without mistakes, but Shuryeong wonders how long the 2 people in the arena would keep charging at each other like that. The chubby guy asks his uncle to go easy, but the man gets irritated and asks who he's calling uncle. He says he should be called vice director and yells that the boy is underestimating the instructor position because he lacks resolve and should quit. Gonsang reflects on how the vice director is going overboard, but the chubby boy yells that he will become an instructor. The vice director gets excited and asks if that's true and if he'll stop drinking, and his nephew agrees that he'll try. Annoyed, he charges again with his sword, saying the boy has no sense of responsibility, so he should go back home immediately, but the chubby boy refuses. Angrily, he asks how he dares defy him, but Gonsang interrupts, saying that's enough. They've seen enough of the boy's skill, while the vice director insists he'll only stain the reputation of the Blue Dragon Academy. The director explains that's not for him to decide, and that he's letting personal feelings interfere with the assessment, but the man apologizes. So after the arena is cleaned up, they prepare for the next fight, where candidate Myung Il-ho should start warming up. Shurion encourages him, saying it'll go well, and he shouldn't be nervous, just show his skills. But then they call for Professor Nam-gong-soo, asking him to get ready. The crowd is impressed, since the professor had never done a demonstration fight before. Shurion complains that Gunsang was cunning because he did nothing about it, but someone grabs his attention, asking if he was talking about the director. The boy turns around, wanting to know who it was. He sees a young woman in her 20s who looked quite delicate, but her steps and breathing were steady. Shurion apologizes, thinking she was someone he knew, and asks if she had any business with him. The girl seems excited and asks if the technique he used to cut through the wind blade was from the Moyang clan. Shurion wonders who exactly this girl is, since she shouldn't have recognized the technique, and denies being from the Moyang clan. The girl then asks if it was from Kunlun. The boy is impressed since both guesses are correct. His master was from the Moyang clan and exiled from Kunlun, but he denies it again, saying the swordsmanship was his father's. The girl asks if his father had achieved enlightenment on his own and was a genius among martial artists. Shurion says he was just a low-ranking officer from the countryside. The girl pouts, thinking he didn't want to answer, but Baek says both sword styles were different. Her face lights up again, wanting to know the differences. Shurion suspects she was testing him and explains that the sword of the Moyang clan was gentle and soft, based on the belief that gentle techniques overcome the strong. Since that was the path of the sword the Moyang clan followed. On the other hand, Kunlun's sword was fierce and rigid, their own path of the sword, and the two couldn't be combined. But the girl decides to take notes. She says she had many more questions, but Shurion cuts her off, saying that if she wanted to learn more, she should go to class. The girl shouts that she was also a candidate to be an instructor. Baek says he thought she was a student, but the girl replies she had already graduated, so the boy wants to know if she graduated from there. She stands up, explaining that she graduated from the Celestial Martial Academy, introducing herself as Jaegil Soyoung, since she had applied to be an instructor in institutional strategy and Murim history. Shurion introduces himself as well, but Soyoung comments that he was the most famous among the candidates. The fight was about to begin, grabbing everyone's attention, and the participants are ordered to get ready. Il-ho attacks with his staff, but is easily countered by Su. Soyoung asks how Shurion thought it would end, and the boy replies that Su's victory was obvious. But that wasn't her question. She wanted to know how long Il-ho would last, since it depended on how lightly Su would take him. The instructor points out that his lower stance is too open and says he should pay attention to his footing. The boy thanks him, and Su comments on his tight grip. The crowd says Il-ho's skill was too low, and this was expected from Professor Su. Il-ho attacks fiercely with the staff. Shurion comments that Namgon wasn't even seeing him as an opponent, and Soyoung agrees, saying he used to be more kind and friendly. But can't even imagine a kind and innocent Namgong Su. Il-ho uses his internal arts, thinking he needs to draw as much attention as possible. Namgong Su readies a sword stance, leaving Shurion surprised by his skill. Il-ho jumps, spinning his staff, aiming to strike Namgong, but he blocks with his sword. Baek is surprised that this strike was blocked. If Su had just stepped back a little, he could have avoided it. Il-ho shouts that this was only the beginning as he swings the staff again, but Namgong Su finds it slow, easily defending with his sword. Il-ho gets frustrated for not landing a hit, but notices an opening at the instructor's base. Shurion notices the same opening. Il-ho tells him not to lose focus as he attacks with the staff, but the instructor defends with just one hand. The boy spins using his energy, preparing for another strike, only to be blocked by Namgong Su's sword. The ground beneath the instructor cracks, left fractured by the power of the strike. Then the instructor says Il-ho was incredible. Shurion notices something different and grows irritated, but Soyoung says he finally understood, since Namgong Su was trying to copy his techniques. Soyoung comments that when Namgong was younger, he had a strong sense of pride and would copy any powerful martial artist. She believed that was one reason he became the Academy's star instructor. And then Su asks if the boy will continue, since he knows Shurion must be disappointed but believes that continuing wouldn't change anything. Shurion notices the professor smiling at him, then repeats Soyoung's earlier question, how long will Myung Il-ho last? The girl agrees but says it's over, only to be contradicted by her friend, since Il-ho would last longer and in time he would wipe the floor with Namgong Su. The girl doesn't believe it, so Baek suggests a bet. Shurion asks in his mind if Il-ho wants to win, because he wants to know if the boy wants to defeat that rude bastard in one go, and Il-ho agrees. Baek tells him from now on not to ask questions and just do what he's told. He asks if Il-ho can do that, and Myeon agrees with determination. Namgong Su replies that he thought Il-ho would have given up by now and tells him to come at him. Illo charges very quickly toward the man. The staff strikes Su's sword to pressure him, but before attacking again, Illo pulls back and changes position, striking the man's sword. Su decides he won't go easy on this brat anymore, but Bake warns him that Su is about to attack with a horizontal slash and says he should dodge, and he does. He's told to keep striking from an angle and go all out. Su defends against the boy's attacks, wondering how this is happening, because that boy is different from before. But he can't back down, crouching to dodge the attack. Shuriong warns a strong blow is coming from the left, so Illo should step back and dodge, and the boy agrees silently, jumping away from Su's incoming sword strike. The professor thinks Illo predicted his move and dodged, while the crowd cheers in his favor. Soang asks what Suryong is doing, but he plays dumb. The girl says it doesn't make sense for someone who was losing to suddenly start landing attacks so precisely, but Suryong calls it a skill. Ilho is slowly starting to see the imaginary circle. The reason he could fight students using external martial arts within that circle was because of this, but in this situation, Ilho is comfortable with internal techniques. Su dug his own grave, so Shuryon tells Ilho to finish it with the next strike, hitting the man's sword. Ilho runs forward, shouting with his staff, using a key attack to strike at Su's head, but Su just complains about the noisy footsteps. He launches himself off the ground quickly, dodging Ilho's blow, but when he looks at the crowd, Suryong is smiling, and the staff comes again. Ilho mocks Su, saying he's going to lose, but Mang asks where he thinks he's looking in the middle of the fight. He jumps with a downward sword strike, saying he'll end it now. Su gets angry, asking if the boy really thinks it's that easy. He unleashes a lightning strike, while Suryong warns Ilho to be careful. Su says he'll be the one to decide when the fight ends, striking the boy's chest. Ilho loses consciousness mid-air, dropping his staff as he falls to the ground. Suryong rushes forward quickly as Soyoung turns her head, catching Myung in his arms, and laying him down on the ground. Ilho tries to speak to his Hyung, but he tells him to shut up, using acupuncture. Suryong asks if the professor was trying to kill him. Namgong-soo apologizes, saying it was a tense situation and he ended up using sword aura without thinking. The young man smiles darkly and asks if Su thinks everything will be fine with just an apology. Annoyed, the instructor demands to know what Su thinks he's doing, but Gunsang stops the fight, telling Suryong to return to his place because he won't tolerate any interruptions. However, Bake tries to speak. The director gets irritated, asking if his student isn't listening, releasing a pressure that makes both Suryong and Namgong-soo feel uneasy. He asks them to wait a moment, and the two leave. Gunsang shakes his head about something. Then Suryong turns to So and tells him to count his blessings. Yeno carries Ilho on his shoulder and asks what happened while he was gone, but Suryong tells him to go to the infirmary first. The announcer calls back Suryong and tells him to head to the training platform, but the young man says he'll finish this quickly and be there soon. Hirak repeats his words and says the newbie doesn't know who he's dealing with, because he plans to seize the opportunity, but is cut off by Suryong asking if they should start, and the director agrees. The professor gets irritated at being ignored, but Bake walks up behind him, complaining that he can't take this fight seriously, because he won't leave a good impression even if he wins, so he's just thinking of fighting however he wants. But he's in a really bad mood, so he's going to knock him out in one go, leaving Irak terrified. The professor is sent flying by the blow, landing in front of Namgong-soo and the vice director. Su complains that the bastard threw him forward on purpose, but Suryong just smiles angrily at the situation. He says he should share what he heard about the Blue Dragon Academy on the way here, since it's not the same anymore and has passed its prime, with talk of it no longer being one of the 5 great Murem academies, but Su tells him to get down immediately. The boy asks if he said something wrong, and the professor explains that the Blue Dragon Academy cannot be judged by someone like him. Gunsang denies this, telling them to let candidate Bak Suryong continue speaking. However, if his intention is to deceive the academy and him, he will be held accountable for it. Suryong apologizes if his words were offensive, but he wishes to continue speaking. Since his specialty is observing people, a habit he developed when he was younger, he can sense others' abilities and more when he meets them. Among these people was someone who underestimates the Blue Dragon Academy while promoting others. Also, a student from a wealthy family who tried to coerce him into being a subordinate using alcohol. He found someone with incredible skills who was infamous for being a delinquent, which irritated Wang. But Suryong says those weren't the people he was referring to, because the Blue Dragon Academy was full of promising and talented young students. However, none of them are doing anything because the academy is the smallest among the 5 great academies and they have an inferiority complex, afraid of losing. The student council president stands up, shouting that it's not true. But Suryong decides to ask a question about the council's goal this year, which was to place higher in the rankings, but he wanted to know how many ranks higher. So says it was to defeat the White Tiger Academy, which ranked 4th, but Baek reflects that it's only 4th place, and the gap must be huge. He states that he came to become a star instructor, but a certain someone asked him to be a good teacher first. He spent the night planning to create a master that would make him a star instructor, but changed his plans and decided to take charge of the martial competition to guarantee the academy's victory. Soso gets excited, saying the instructor is cool, and on top of that, a good martial artist with great knowledge, leaving Doju in disbelief. The girl orders them to make a list of the low-grade students for Baek Suryong, since they might be spies from other academies. Dojik warns that it's a peculiarity contest, but Soso says she was fighting seriously and asks if he didn't see her demonstration class, because with those skills, he could join any of the 5 great academies and be well received, and if he decides to go elsewhere, there's no stopping him. The council leader thinks the Blue Dragon Academy has passed its prime and was once a real contender in the celestial martial competition, but is no longer the same. His whole family came from the academy, and he was proud of it. But one day, it became a source of shame because the promising Murim students no longer enrolled in the Blue Dragon Academy. All the best went elsewhere, and the biggest proof of this was that in the celestial martial competition, this academy had finished last for 10 consecutive years. Yeonho asks if his hyung has gone crazy, but Suryong tells him to keep his voice down so he doesn't wake Ilho. Ak complains that winning the martial competition is a promise he can't keep, but the guy says it's true. His friend calls him crazy, but Soyoung appears at the door, asking for permission to enter. Since her friend was there, she asks how the patient is doing. Suryong says he's fine and asks how her demonstration went, but the girl says she finished there and came straight here. Suryong notices that her breathing was normal and her clothes were clean, so he couldn't even tell she had been fighting. He wonders if her weapon is the judge's pen since she wouldn't use the book as a weapon. He really wanted to see how she fights. Soyoung asks why he was looking at her like that, and the guy says it's nothing, wanting to know why she came to the infirmary so quickly. The girl wants to know if he was serious about taking the Blue Dragon Academy to first place in the celestial martial competition, because he might regret it. Suryong asks why she would say that, but she explains that it's something absolutely impossible to do. Yeonho wants to know what that noise was. Soyoung says it's the closing ceremony, and Suryong asks to talk about it later, since everyone leaves saying it's impossible without even trying first. On the street, people call him crazy for saying such a thing seriously. He reflects that he heard that in the bloody cult as well, but since he said he wanted to be a star instructor and a good teacher, he'll have to change. The director calls candidate Baek Suryong's attention, wanting to know if his earlier words were serious, and Suryong agrees. Gunsang says that even if he's serious, he doesn't know how the students will feel, as they'll be uncomfortable just with that statement, so he shouldn't be offended. Suryong says that, judging by the atmosphere, he thought the same thing, and the director asks what he'll do if he fails. The young man says he will open a gym across the street, and that in less than 10 years, his students will beat up those from the Blue Dragon Academy. Gunsang laughs and says he must be his role model, so Baek thanks him. The vice director announces that it's time for the speech at the closing ceremony. He turns around and tells Suryong he's leaving and hopes to see him again, and the young man agrees to meet him in the future. The young man listens to the ceremony next to Yeonho and Soyoung, but on the way out, his friend comments that a lot of people were staring, while Soyoung says to get used to it, and Suryong wonders if they'll want to join his gym. Yeonho asks why he's getting tied up with his friend, because if he fails, Yeonho still has a chance, but his friend denies it. Still, if it's not a bother, he wants to invite Soyoung for drinks, and the girl agrees. Yeonho says he knows a lot of restaurants nearby, and asks if there's something Soyoung wants to eat, but the girl says anything is fine. Baek asks about Ilho, but Yeonho says he's resting because he's sick. However, that's not what Suryong meant. He wanted to visit him. They run off, deciding not to visit their friend and hurry before the tables fill up. The next day, they meet at the board with the results. Suryong and Yeonho slowly approach the paper. They see the final announcement of the results for the new instructor test, with Soyoung in first place, Yeonho in second, Ilho in 7th, and Suryong in 10th. Ak thanks everyone for passing, and Baek comments that Ilho would be happy too. But Yeonho wants to know what that face on his friend is about, and if it's because of the ranking, but he denies it since the salary is the same for everyone. Yeonho asks why, and Suryong points at the paper. He sees that he's in 10th place, but also listed as the provisional instructor of the recovery class. He wants to know what that class is. Soso explains that, as the name suggests, it's for students who need extra help and includes all those who failed due to personal issues. Suryong reflects that Nam Gong-soo is a bastard for insulting him this way, but the girl starts giving an example. She mentions students like Kinonwon Kang being there, and the young man thinks it's different from what he imagined. Soso talks about students who never show up to class and says she'll file an official complaint through the student council, but Suryong says no, because he actually likes the sound of being the recovery class instructor. Nunsang, on a podium, thanks everyone, and welcomes the new tutors. Suryong thinks he has to respect the empty formalities they love. Mion comments that anyone hearing his friend now would think he isn't even part of a faction, but Suryong says he's been part of one since birth. Gunsang announces that senior instructors will work with new instructors, and Yeonho comments that they usually pair veterans with similar skills. Nangong-soo calls out Javel Soyoung and asks her to come with him. Suryong mocks Soo for being a senior instructor, as he sees a hard path ahead for Soyoung. The director starts calling students and their respective senior instructors. Suryong wonders why he has a bad feeling. Then Director Mei calls out Baksturyong. He asks him to come along, and Suryong agrees with his grandfather, though he thinks he would have preferred Nangong-soo. Mei shows the Movement Arts Hall and explains that it was created for training, but some kids smoke there in secret, so he should keep an eye on it. There's also the closed training club for those seeking enlightenment, but kids who get caught smoking or drinking have to train double. He talks about the student council building and says it can't be left unchecked just because it's under council jurisdiction. Some even snuck in alcohol. Finally, there's the Federation building, the most important place where inappropriate relationships with the opposite sex happen, and Suryong asks if he should catch them. Mei tells him to make the students suffer on the spot, and the young man is shocked. The grandfather says his speech was premature because the Blue Dragon Academy is no longer what it once was. The Celestial Martial Competition strengthens ties between the 5 academies, but after the cult's fall, it became a battleground, with the Dragon Phoenix fights being the fiercest. That's because the title of Dragon Phoenix is given to the 8 strongest students. However, for the past 10 years, the Blue Dragon Academy hasn't had a single student capable of earning that title. 30 years ago, Suryong's father was the academy's best result in the competition, ranking among the top 4 in the fight. The young man asks what he was like, but his grandfather tells him not to speak of that man. After all, he has to change the deep-rooted belief in failure that exists in the students' minds. Suryong agrees, saying that if it were truly impossible, he wouldn't have said anything. Mei comments that his arrogance was familiar, and the young man asks if it was like his father's, but the grandfather denies it, because it was just like his daughter's. Suryong tries to change the subject by asking if his grandfather knows anything about the recovery class. Mei repeats that he's in charge of that class, and his grandson agrees. Yumin from the 2nd year, Jio Sangwon from the 4th year, Hyunwon Kang from the 3rd year. It was a difficult place for Suryong since the kids didn't even listen to him. They weren't well-behaved kids, and Baek asks if Soo gave him the recovery class for no reason. Suryong reflects that he'd prefer a class full of skilled students who misbehave over students with no talent at all, wondering where to start. He asks where Kang's room is, who was training until 100, doing one-handed push-ups, and finally reaching the final count. He collapses on the ground, exhausted, looking down nervously, remembering how Suryong grabbed his hand and slammed him into the ground because he had hit his head. But Suryong commented that he knew Kang would be the first. Kang says he'll defeat that bastard one of these days, because he didn't even see that attack coming, so he'll let it slide. He stands up to replicate the movement, repeating Suryong's movements, but he denies it, wondering how he can move the same way as that bastard, when Suryong appears asking if he should explain the reason. Kang yells that just because he explained how, doesn't mean it would work, but he's startled by the teacher entering through the window. Suryong says he's a great student for training alone, and Kang tells him to get lost. The teacher says that now that he's his official instructor, he came for a private conversation, but Hyunwon refuses, asking why he was sitting down, then corrects his name, saying it's only one character. Suryong grabs the student's shoulder, telling him to sit down already and forcing him to the ground. He asks if he was copying him, but the student denies it, so Suryong teases him, saying he'll show him again, so he should pay attention. The boy gets embarrassed, but the teacher notices he seems curious, so he says he'll demonstrate a little, using a martial arts technique, and asks if he noticed the difference. Kang looks ahead silently. Suryong says the difference is that he lacks flexibility. The boy tries to argue that he practices frequently, but the teacher complains he hasn't practiced enough. He asks if the student figured out the issue, and Kang asks if it's because his arm and leg positions were different. His teacher confirms and says he had just copied exactly what his student was doing. Wang asks how he can do that after watching just once, and Suryong agrees because his student can do it too. But he'll have to practice the 18 forms of the Green Forest to get there. So he asks if he wants to learn and says he looks like he's dying to. Kang stays silent in front of the teacher, but lowers his head, saying he has no interest in the crappy martial arts he would teach. Suryong asks if it's because of the Habuk clan. Kang reaches for his sword, calling his teacher a bastard, holding it to Suryong's neck, asking if he thinks he wouldn't take a teacher's life. Baek simply smiles at the student, asking if he really thought he'd lose to someone like him. He says he's aware of the issues with the Pain clan, since they say that thanks to help in the past, The Hyunwon clan is a disciple of the Pang clan. He asks if it's because of Pang that he's doing this, thinking he'll get stronger and secure a place within the clan, but that's stupid, yet Kang tells him to shut up, trying to strike Kang while saying he doesn't know anything. Suryeon dodges and asks why he really wants to act like this when he's someone who joined the academy with a fake family and is a genius. But if he keeps this up, his clan will live as the Pang clan's dog, chained with a collar, yet Wang tries to cut him again, yelling at him to shut up once more, demanding to know what he really knows, but Suryeon dodges, saying he's just stating the obvious. However, if he starts training with him, things will change. Kang attacks, telling him to shut up again, but Suryeon notices it's the same move he had just demonstrated, then prepares a strike, saying the student has talent. Talent so great that he could surpass the Mad Demon, throwing his student far away, and says that he can turn the Hyunwon clan into an incomparable family. Kang runs, telling him to stop talking nonsense, but Baek says it was enough to inspire him. At the restaurant, Suryeon asks how their first day went. Yeono complains that they were too harsh, and Ilho would feel the same since he's not even older than his students. Soyoung slams her cup on the table, saying Namgong is obsessed with training. He said since it was her first day, he'd let her leave early, and he actually did this time. So Yeonho and Ilho say she suffered too much. But he wants to know how Hyung's class in medicinal arts went, and Bak replies that he spoke with Hongwon Kang, but the reason he's learning martial arts is to provoke Sahyek. It means he's annoying the person who will become the head of the Pang clan because he knows that's the best he can achieve. Soyoung explains that the two clans had a healthy relationship, but after the appearance of the Mad Demon within the clan, that relationship fell apart, and Ilho asks about it. Suryeon refers to the Mad Demon Hyunwoo Hugh. The greatest genius of the Hyunwon clan redefined the techniques of the dividing sword and celestial lightning strike, but went insane and killed many people. Soyoung says one of the victims was the former young chief of the Habuk Pang clan. After that, the Mirim Alliance went after him, but the Mad Demon disappeared without a trace. He reflects that, in reality, he was captured by the Blood Sect while fleeing and was imprisoned there, but Soyoung says that wasn't the end of it, because 20 years later, there was the mass defeat of the bloody Mad Demon. Suryeon wonders what she just said and wants to know more about it. She repeats about the bloody Mad Demon, and the girl says the story was rushed, because 20 years after vanishing, he secretly returned to the Se clan. Suryeon thinks that the clan leader at that time was the Mad Demon's younger brother, and in secret he held a private banquet for other clan members to celebrate his brother's return. However, during the banquet, the Mad Demon took the lives of his relatives and set fire to all the sword techniques and records in the building. Yeonho asks if she means it wasn't just clan members, and Ilho adds that he also killed those who didn't know martial arts. Soyoung confirms, because according to survivor stories, it was as if the entire clan had been annihilated. Since after that, the Pang clan expanded its influence over the Hyunwon clan, and Suryeon reflects that it should have been impossible, because the Mad Demon lost his life that day along with everything else. The man kneels on the ground with a hole in his chest, speaking of his father, mother, younger siblings, and family whose blood was shed, but he didn't think he'd be able to repay all the blessings he received in this life. So if he's born again, he will repay everything he couldn't in this life. The king of the forest calls him a bastard and tells him not to start wishing for death yet because he hasn't even started beating him. However, the Mad Demon rises and calls the assassin, then thanks him for everything, while the Blood Sect soldiers charge forward. Mang Sohak curses the soldiers while crying, and says he'll take all of their lives, charging forward with his fist. Walking through the forest at night, he thinks it's impossible that the Mad Demon Master was behind this, because they lost their lives there. The fact that they used the Mad Demon and the martial arts of the Hyunwon clan to commit this act, only one group could do that. It was definitely the Blood Sect. Kang thinks about Suryeon's words about his clan living on a leash like a dog of the Pang clan, and screams that it's all crap, because it doesn't matter even if he goes out drinking and runs into Pang. The man asks where the loser is going at this hour, and if he's going to drink again. But Kang walks right past him without saying anything. He turns around and asks if the dog shouldn't obey its master, and if he's not listening. Kang starts to laugh, and the others wonder what's wrong with him, saying he still seems drunk. The successor of the Mad Demon draws his sword, saying they're going to fight because it's been a long time since he did that with Pang Sahyek. Pang wonders if he's lost his mind, but Kang wants to know if he's scared and thinks he'll lose to him and cry like when they were kids. Then he calls him a bastard and tells him to come at him. Kang runs at his rival with his sword, then kneels in front of him. Pang asks if he really thought he'd beat him like when they were children, because while he was out drinking, Pang was training. While Kang wrestled with his inferiority complex, he was working hard every second, but the young man just laughs at him because he drank special elixirs and gave his own blood to learn martial arts under the guidance of great teachers, and even then, he was still worse than him. Pang strikes him hard in the stomach, asking what being born into a good clan has to do with not training enough, because he thought that by getting stronger, he could lead the clan. Then he asks if he really thinks he's that kind of person, stepping on him. Pang starts sweating in front of his rival, telling him to listen to the last piece of advice he'd give as a friend: don't show up again, or else he'll crush him like an insect. He decides to leave while Kang stays lying on the table. A raindrop falls onto his head. The boy closes his wet hand, puts it on his face and laments because he felt like garbage. In the past, the two were friends, running toward each other. Kang asks if they were going to train again today, and Saryuk says he'd beat him. The two spent the whole day fighting, having fun like real friends. Clashing swords, Pang says he'll win, but Kang had no doubt it would be him. Saryuk uses internal energy, saying he'll definitely win. Kang reflects that he knew he was learning the clan's techniques, but he had gotten way stronger. The only thing he had learned was a so-so sword technique, and says he'd never lose to Saryuk, landing a hit on his friend's head. The clan members run over to Pang, asking if the young master was alright, because if something had gone wrong, Saryuk's life would have been in danger. But Kang didn't understand what happened. The leader of the Pang clan approaches, asking what they were talking about, wanting to know if Kang really tried to take his son's life, but the boy denies it. Kang's father kneels on the ground, begging the clan head to forgive him just this once, because he acted without thinking of the consequences. Since they were never equals, not even when they were younger, the clan leader agrees, asking if he really thought his son and Kang were the same, and says he never wants to see Kang again. When they arrived at the academy, Saryuk calls out to Hyunwon, saying it's been a while and they were also learning, asking if he got the letter he sent, but Kang reflects the heirs of the 5 clans trained there. Saryuk says he wanted to come earlier, but his father didn't let him, so Hyunwon, annoyed, says he had things to do. He asks what's with all the hostility and chases after his friend for a long time, until he realizes Kang reeks of alcohol, asking if he's going to live forever in that careless state. Lying on the ground, Saryuk says that idiots should have gone to the Celestial Academy, but still ended up there. But Namgong-soo calls out to Hyunwon Kang, asking what he was doing lying there, because judging by his condition, it looked like he was fighting again, wanting to know why he even enrolled there since he has high expectations for his potential. But Kang tells him to go away, so the teacher asks if he's giving up, extending a hand and offering him one last chance to change. Kang refuses because he had no interest in any of it, and Soo asks if he really wants to stay that way, throwing down an umbrella and saying he better leave on his own because he'll make sure he gets expelled, telling him to enjoy his last days since giving the umbrella is the last thing he'll do for him. Kang thinks he was rude, and calling it his last chance wasn't even funny, saying there's no point in accepting an opportunity from him, because the only thing he can do are 2 half-baked techniques. His whole body was wrecked, so dying there would be perfect. Suryong appears, calling out to Hyunwon Kang, saying it's a coincidence meeting again and wants to know why he's acting like a beggar, while splashing water on his face. Kang gets up angry, wanting to know if he's crazy, but Suryong says he should call him master. At home, Kang yells that he's saying he's not a genius, because when he fought Pang Sahyok, he couldn't do anything. Suryong replies that it's because the young master of the Pang clan heard countless times that he was a prodigy, but Kang says he's leaving the academy. Since Namgong-soo is going to expel him, he figured he might as well become a vagabond to fully master his clan's technique. Suryong hits him on the head and asks if he's joking, asking how that would be any different from the way he's been living so far. Kang denies it, saying that no matter what he does, it's never enough. But Suryong says he's running away to a place where none of the clans exist, and his student gets irritated. He says that if he's wrong, Kang should prove it, because he'll teach him a new sword technique, asking if he's interested because it's a technique from an expert of the old generation, and Kang asks if he really knows that kind of technique. Then he explains it's the one that was used. Hyunwon looks impressed as he stares ahead. Suryong replies that he should forget about it, but the technique was good and hard to learn. Someone from the recovery class can't master it, but Kang questions why. Baek asks if he's seriously saying he'll be able to learn the technique. Then Kang shouts that yes, he is, and he won't give up on it. Suryong says it's difficult, but Kang replies that he's a genius. Baek hits him, saying it's time to teach him some manners. He jumps and sits on top of the student, thinking he'll turn Hyunwon Kang into the greatest swordsman of all, and the boy responds that it'd be nice to start acting like it. In the director's office, Gunsang asks if Pang really wants to transfer to the Celestial Martial Arts Academy after all this time. Saryuk replies that he wants to compete with better students and a better environment, and that he needs a recommendation letter. Gunsang says it's disappointing, especially with so much going on in the academy. Pang agrees, saying that alone, no one can change anything there, so he's leaving. The director promises to write the letter by tomorrow afternoon and hopes he enjoyed his time at the academy. Pang thinks he has no ties to this place anymore and nothing left to learn, and he's tired of gaining authority. He wants to go further. But he's interrupted by Hyunwon Kang calling out to him, asking where the hell he was, because he'd been looking for him for hours. Sahyuk asks if he didn't already warn what would happen if he showed up in front of him again, but Kang asks to fight once more. Pain draws his sword, saying he'll beat him since he never gets tired, but Hyunwon says no, he meant next time, because he's going to learn a new sword technique, and he won't drink or smoke, he'll train like a madman. Pain sees the younger Kang saying that as soon as he learns the technique, they'll fight again and argue again, yelling for him to wait and see while Sahyuk looks confused. He agrees with Kang, since he's not the type to accept defeat easily, so he'll do his best to beat him when the time comes. The next day, Kang and Suryeong go to a cabin. The master asks if that's really all his student is bringing, and he confirms. Kang had a letter from Sahyuk saying he's going to the Celestial Martial Arts Academy and that they'll have to fight at the martial arts gathering, so he says he has everything he needs with him now, with his hair cut like it was in childhood. Suryeong tells him to go inside, saying this is where they'll stay, and there's someone else will be training with Kang, who asks who it is. The instructor reveals it's his secret weapon, who he's been training to win the Celestial Martial Arts Tournament. Chien runs up to Suryeong, but the man corrects him to call him teacher. He pats his head and asks if he's been doing well, and Chien replies that he has. Baek says he's been a little busy, but from now on he'll see him daily since training starts here tomorrow. Chien asks who the person beside him is, but Kang introduces himself and says he'll be training with him from today. The boy introduces himself and says he's turning 15 this year, so Sunbae can feel comfortable with him. Suryeong explains that he'll help him qualify for the entrance exam, and soon he'll be his Huba. Chien says he's heard the test is hard but will do his best. Kang reflects that the test isn't something just anyone can pass, so he tells Chien to work hard. The instructor watches the two interacting and thinks they seem like a cat and a mouse meeting for the first time, but they'll be training together from now on. Kang questions having to train with a kid, but Chien is happy he won't be bored. Suryeong suggests they have a friendly match since they've already met. Hyunwon hopes the boy isn't annoying and all over him, wondering if he should crush his hopes in the first duel. Baek warns that no internal martial arts are allowed, and Chien agrees. The training begins, and Kang crashes face first into the ground. Chien asks if his Sunbae is okay, but Hyunwon starts vomiting, saying he's finally warmed up and they should fight for real now. They fight multiple times, but Chien always wins, and Kang keeps asking to fight again, up to the 9th round. Hyunwon gets hit in the chest. Chien approaches and asks if his Sunbae is really okay, but Kang tells him not to talk to him. As expected, Wei Chien is stronger. However, Hyunwon Kang has a different kind of talent. He has superior control over his body, which allows him to copy a technique just by observing it once. He also has stamina. The direct and destructive sword style of the Mad Demon was perfect for him. On the other hand, when he looks at Chien, he imagines an honorable swordsman instructor. His master says that a swordsman must love the sword, and the younger Suryeong asks if that isn't obvious. Yonghan comments that most swordsmen see the sword as just a martial arts tool or a weapon for battle, but they don't truly love it. Suryeong asks what he means by loving the sword and if he's supposed to open his heart, and the master agrees, because to understand your sword, you must look at it deeply every day. But even if that were true, he still managed to learn everything on his own. Besides that, Chien loves his sword. Since he has deep mastery over it, he can keep improving. As soon as he recovers, he'll be able to progress even faster. Just imagining those two beating everyone up in martial arts competition was satisfying, telling them to crush everyone. But he realizes he also has to get stronger, even though he's been training in external martial arts every day with the 18 Green Forest technique. The problem is that he needs preparation to master the fate-challenging technique, but he must meet Bak Mansion soon to get the elixir. He says he hopes Elder Y is doing well, and the old man replies that he was going to scare him from behind but got caught, then asks about the forge. Wei hands over a cloth, saying he came to talk about that, and that it's going to be more expensive than expected, since he wrote down everything that's needed. Suryeong thinks that just by looking, it's clear those are expensive items, while Y apologizes, but he says it's alright, and he should just focus on the forge. If he needs anything else, he just needs to ask. After all, he's rich. Bak says they don't have money after reading the paper. Chang is surprised and asks what he means by that. The guard says the money disappeared, so the master asks how that makes sense, since they receive few resources, and now he's saying it vanished. He says maybe he's skimming off the top, but Bak yells that he didn't touch anything, and all the invested businesses were shut down, so profits dropped drastically. The restaurant called Dragon's Diner and the forge in front of Azure Academy also closed because Elder Wei can't stop buying expensive things. Even though the investments weren't damaged, there's no money in surplus, but there's still a lot to prepare for the merchants and prostitutes, so they'll have to wait a year. Chang understands and asks him to continue managing the administrative work, and Bok thanks him, saying he won't regret it. He says that regarding the markets and prostitutes, they need a new name, and the guard asks if he has something in mind. The young man had just founded the White Dragon Academy and would give them a name, so he says the merchants and prostitutes will now be called White Dragon. Suryeong gathers with his friends, calling out to them, asking if they had any money, and Soyeon was wondering how he was going to buy beer, while Yeonho is startled by the question. Baek says he'll pay it back next month when he gets paid, but both friends were broke. Soyeon takes out a pouch of coins and says she'll give him the money he needs, and he should say so if he needs more. Suryeon remembers the bet and says he won't spend it now, but save it for a certain moment, so the girl asks if he's sure, because it's a loan and he has to pay it back when he receives his payment, so Suryeon agrees with her. The girl suggests that if he needs money, he could give private lessons, but it seemed like he never had time for that. Raoling asks about private lessons. Illo explains that he could earn money by offering private martial arts classes, and Soyeon says the academy entrance exam is in 1 month. Suryeon asks why they didn't tell him earlier, and the girl comments that they don't make much money, because experience is needed, like with Namgong. Since he's a star instructor, he must earn 300 silvers a month, so Baek thinks he has no worldly desires and yet is still greedy. Then asks if that isn't way too cheap, but Yeonho says they don't make much money. Suryeon declares he'll earn more than Namgong Soo, and they'll have no choice but to give him all the money. At dawn in the city, an old man comments that the city is quite peaceful while looking out the window. His soldier says the morning air is very cold, but the elder says that even while recovering, it doesn't bother him, and that it's a pleasure to be back in his city. The man replies that he'll make a full recovery, but the elder says he has no unfinished business and no desire to return, because instead he should just observe how noisy everyone is. The students gather in a warehouse saying that Baek Suryeong is a future star instructor and probably just a delusional guy in Mirim society. The elder then asks for some flyers to be brought to him, saying it had been a while and he was curious. The poster was of Suryeong, saying that students could pass right away if qualified. The elder smiles as he reads it, saying that martial arts lessons seemed fun to him. Suryeong heads to the place with his 2 students and asks if they should open for business. Chien and Kang swing their sword and arm, respectively. Suryeong corrects his posture by hitting him, but the young man complains. Then the master asks if the 2 had handed out the flyers. Kang says yes, as he gave out more than 100, and Chien as well, but an old man approaches, asking if that was the White Dragon Academy. Suryeong gets excited and says yes, and that they were welcome. Just by sensing his aura, he knew the old man wasn't just anyone, and his bodyguard looked stronger than average, so Baek offers tea. He asks if he came to enroll his grandsons, saying it'd be good for them to come next time, and asks his age, but the old man denies it. He's the one enrolling. He asks if Suryeong thinks an old man like him can enter Blue Dragon Academy. Suryeong apologizes for asking his age, and the old man says he's 64. The young man jokes that he's been wanting to enroll for more than 50 years, and the old man asks if age matters so much when it comes to learning, but Suryeong explains it would be difficult. However, the elder offers to pay 10 times the fee, and his guard gets agitated. Baek gently asks for the elder's hand to measure his talent. The old man asks how he is. Then the young man explains that even with that amount, it would still be difficult, leaving the elder confused. Suryeong tells him to pay 20 times the fee instead. He'll make him the best student ever to enter Blue Dragon Academy. The bodyguard gets angry, pointing his sword and asking how he dares to deceive his master. If he keeps lying, he'll cut out his tongue. But the old man strikes his cane on the ground and calls the man Shadow, saying that the one underestimating the situation now is this young man. Or is it his subordinate? Shadow bows and apologizes, but the elder does so to the teacher, while Suryeong admits the guard is loyal. But honestly, it would be difficult for someone his age to learn martial arts, and at best, he might land in the secondary class with some luck. The elder says he's quite lucky, and his subordinate grumbles. Then Suryeong says an angel must have fallen in front of the elder. Laughing, the old man says he likes him because when the sword was pointed at him, he didn't even blink. But Baek explains he didn't feel any danger. He laughs even harder, while Shadow stays silent. The old man says he'll pay 30 times the amount. That would be 9,000 silver, but he wants to give 10,000 half now and rest upon passing. Suryeong thinks there's no reason to refuse and says he'll make sure the elder passes. He says he hopes so because if he doesn't help him pass, he'll be very disappointed in him. Baek thinks he doesn't want to face the wrath of someone who can hand over 10,000 silver with a word, so he says training starts today and will last for a month. After training, Suryeong comments that the old man has far more stamina than he expected and still held his cane, but the elder says he used to do gymnastics, revealing a blade hidden in the cane's handle. He says he wondered why he needed a cane, but it seems that was the reason. The elder says it's for self-defense, but he never used it, and Shadow scolds him, saying he'll always be with him so he doesn't have to. Shurion reflects that his stamina isn't bad and could be worse, but he'll have to make up for the lacking part with the 18 Green Forest techniques since he checked his body. Then he asks if he can assess his physical condition, but Shadow says he already did that. Bake explains it's not enough and that he wants to check the internal energy flow in his body. Shadow begs his master to refuse, but Suryong insists, saying he won't hurt him and asks for his trust. The old man says he can go ahead, so the young man asks him to sit. Bake explains he'll transfer internal energy into him and the elder mustn't resist, just let it flow. So he decides to begin. He notices something strange in the old man's body, wondering if he eats elixirs for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Because it seemed like he never trained, yet the effects of the medicines were useless due to the large amount of impure energy in him, blocking his health. Shurion asks him to open his eyes now. The elder turns and asks how he was, and the young man realizes he already knew. He then explains that 10,000 silver coins was no small amount, and it was a miracle the old man was still alive. Apparently, his doctor was incredible. Using his cane to stand, he asks if the young man just realized that, because even famous doctors wouldn't have been capable. The old man asks what he should do now, but Suryong says that since he's aware of the impure energy, he needs to get rid of it. The uncomfortable and painful part comes right after that. The old man asks if it's possible, but Shadow yells that he's talking nonsense. The elder gets excited because he might be able to remove the energy once thought impossible. Suryong says that's why he's an angel who fell from the heavens. With the old man lying on the bed, Bake comments that the bodyguard was still suspicious of him, and even after checking if he was armed, remained cautious. But the elder tells him to clear his mind. Suryong asks the old man to close his eyes and take a deep breath, because it's going to hurt. He begins removing the impure energy, thinking to himself that it's easier now, maybe because he already did it with Qian. The old man begins to groan in pain, and Suryong wonders if he's reached his limit, then decides to stop for today, noticing a yellow energy. The medicinal remedies the old man had been taking were also coming out. He wonders if the old man lived with impure energy for so long that it became part of him. That old man wasn't just blessed by the gods, he also served as an elixir for Suryong, who decides to absorb everything. The room becomes engulfed in impure energy. The old man starts coughing and opens his eyes. Shadow enters the room asking if the elder is alright. The old man feels delighted with how light his body feels after the energy was removed, but Suryong warns that if he continues, the medicines will also disappear from his body. He says he doesn't mind but asks if the doctor is okay, and Bake, out of breath, agrees. He just needs a minute, collapsing to the floor. The old man calls out to Professor Bake, who is lying on the ground. He wonders who exactly this guy is, because even seeing it with his own eyes, he can't believe he did something not even his doctors could do. He then asks Shadow if he could do the same if he became an instructor, but his guard denies it. He's never heard of that method of expulsion. The old man recalls the absorption technique, and Shadow explains that it steals spiritual energy. But over time, the vessel burns out, which is why it's considered a demonic art. But even if it was the absorption technique, absorbing impure energy is asking to die. And if it were poison, there would be an antidote, but impure energy only grows. Suryong wakes up, and the old man asks if he's really okay. The professor says yes, and tells them both to go rest because he's feeling a bit feverish and needs a bath. On the way out, Shadow pulls the elder aside, telling him that Bake could have lost his life that day, startling the old man. He asks if it was over 10,000 silver, but Shadow says it was because he promised to get the old man into the academy, and was willing to risk his life for that promise. The old man says it's because he forced Bake to do something so difficult, and after the doctor's ultimatum, he assumed he'd live just a few more peaceful years. Suryong meditates with the impure energy, noticing that if he keeps focusing, he might reach the 4th level of the Divine Fate challenging technique. The next morning, Ryong asks why the elder was there so early, but he explains that he was thinking about the favor and about how far Bake went for him. Bake asks what he means by that, but the old man tells him not to be embarrassed. From now on, he would train like a condemned man, and since it was very rude not to say his name, he introduces himself as Gong Sansu. Sansu kneels and begs to become his disciple, and Ryong wishes he'd go back to acting like yesterday. He asks why Shadow isn't saying anything, but Shadow says he respects the elder. Suryong asks him not to speak informally. It makes things more uncomfortable, and thinks he managed to reach the 4th level of the divine technique thanks to him, but warns that today they're heading to the training grounds to begin dawn practice. They'll start by doing the same exercises as yesterday. The elder runs, saying he feels like his body is floating, and Suryong tells him he's going too fast, suddenly hurting his back. Suryong tells him to slow down while Shadow runs over to his master. Bake thinks he still has a long road ahead. His grandfather asks if Suryong has started teaching, and the young man replies that yes, he's with Hyunwon Kang, a 15-year-old boy, and an elder. Mei says he's the same age as the elder and would be the oldest student if he passes, but Suryong says he's in good shape and has a strong spirit. There was also the 15-year-old boy named Wiji Qian, who had incredible potential to be the best student of the year. But from behind, Namgong-soo mocks him, asking who the best would be, and Suryong remembers the rude and scornful voice. The instructor greets the student leader, but Mei asks who the students behind him are. Soo says they're students he teaches, already one step away from passing this year's entrance exam, and he believes one of them will be the best. A young man named Namgong-seok introduces himself and says it's an honor to meet the legendary saber-toothed tiger of the sword. Mei says there's no need for flattery and asks if he's from the Namgong clan. Seok agrees and asks who this Wiji Qian is, as he memorized all the promising students of the year, but he never heard of this Wiji Qian before, and Soo tells him not to worry about it, since even a father has to love his own child. Seok laughs, asking if that's the reason, while Suryong mentally calls him a lunatic. The boy greets the instructor but apologizes for not knowing his name, asking to be guided as a humble young student. Suryong introduces himself and thinks the boy is fierce. Seok repeats the name, but a Jomek calls him a show-off while a girl tells her classmate to be careful with his words. Baek wonders how a normal kid is training with Namgong-soo, but the girl says that'll change in 3 months. Suryong curses all the kids, furious for insulting him. Soo tells him not to get mad at the child's words, and the young man agrees. It seems they learned from Professor Namgong. Mei tells the two of them to stop arguing. Soo comments that Suryong also took in Kang, and Suryong agrees, saying he believed in his potential and was training him separately. Namgong responds that Kang is talented but lazy, and if he fails and wants to win the martial arts tournament again, it's because he has big ambitions. Then he orders his students to return for now. Suryong calls out Namgong-soo, telling him to look, asking if he wants to make a bet with him, thinking that insulting his students is the same as insulting himself. So Suryong suggests that in this year's entrance exam, they should see which student does better, thinking he'll feel it if he's going to lose. Namgong-soo calls it madness, and comments that Professor Baek loves to make bets, but he won't win this time. Suryong replies that if he's afraid, he should walk away, because if he loses, he'll take a class with Professor Namgong. Namgong asks what if he wins, but Baek replies that he doesn't know yet. There must be something Soo wants. Soo suggests he clean his room every morning and night. They decide to seal the bet and tease each other before choosing a judge. It will be the student leader who was with them. Mei complains that these grown-up kids only do what they want, but Suryong and Soo both turn around angrily. Suryong throws 3 uniforms in front of his students, saying that from now on, they have 30 minutes to put on the uniform and return there, while they ask about it and why. Suryong grumbles that he said 30 minutes, but they were being lazy, wondering if it looks like he's not talking to them, because whoever's late won't get to eat. The 3 of them run off with the uniforms in hand, while Kang shouts that his teacher is way too petty. Suryong thinks that in 1 month, there's no way he'll lose to someone like Namgong-soo, and from this point on, he's going back to being a demonic instructor, so they better be ready. Kang does a push-up on the ground. Suryong sits on top of him and says he's a tiger or a monkey, but didn't tell him to think he should move too. The student complains about him being on top of him. Baek teases him, telling him to get him off, and the student shouts that he's super annoying. He runs in circles yelling that he's going to rip him off his back, while Suryong enjoys it, telling him to go faster. Kang falls to the ground because he can't move anymore. Suryong touches his head and says he did well. Kang has a question for him. He wants to know why he's copying animals instead of moving like a human. Baek explains that ancient martial arts were created by imitating animals, but nowadays they mimic human movements. Not that it's bad, but the meaning got lost. His opponent may use strengths that Kang never had or used, but this will help with his training too, thinking the movements will form the base of the 18 techniques. He'll also be useful when he teaches the Ashura blood sword path, because Kang doesn't need to worry about exams, and Baek has no intention of going easy on him, remembering Namgong-soo's words about him being lazy. He then hits his student on the head. Kang asks why the slap, but the teacher replies it was because he suddenly got angry. He complains that the teacher is taking out his frustrations on him, but Baek reveals what Namgong had said about him. This enrages Kang to the point where his anger helps him grow stronger. Suryong says that if he's angry, he should prove he's not someone insignificant and finish the work on his own. He goes over to Qian and asks if he's recovering well, and the boy replies that he's not sure, he feels fine. But when he accesses his energy, he starts sweating cold. Qian's Danshin and veins have fully recovered, so the possibility of it being psychological is high, since when he suffered from impure energy, all he could think about was taking lives, and now when he accesses internal energy, he feels a sense of danger. Suryong says it's okay, and that he'll find a solution within a month, while Xion apologizes for it. Baek says that if he can't use internal energy, he'll be humiliated by Namgong-soo, and expelled from Blue Dragon Academy, having to sell everything. But it's okay, and his students shouldn't feel pressured. Shurion watches old man Sun Tzu swinging his sword, then warns that he's overdoing it again, but the elder says he can handle more than that, while Suryong thinks he's already at his limit. So he asks him to take a break because he doesn't look well, and forcing the body is the same as taking a beating. But Sun Tzu insists on continuing. Raong says it may be frustrating, but he's not on the boy's level right now, and the elder tries to argue. Then the teacher smiles at him, asking him not to be stubborn because he'll make sure he gets into Blue Dragon Academy. Sun Tzu agrees because he's very eager, but Bake tells him to come inside as it'll help him relax. He starts giving him a back massage, and the old man says he's been massaged at the Imperial Palace before, but this is the first time he's met someone this good. He asks if he enjoys being a palace masseur, but Suryong denies it, saying he's doing well, and asks how training is going. It's difficult, but he's enjoying it, because as a child, his body was very weak, so learning martial arts was a distant dream.
Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.